It is Wednesday, November 29th, 2017. The time is 7:02 p.m. This is the Plan Commission of the City of Evanston. I am Jim Ford. We have a quorum, so I will call the meeting to order. You have the agenda. Are there changes or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda will stand as presented. You have the minutes of our meeting of Wednesday, November 8th. Are there additions or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? Lewis, seconded.
Second.
Goddard. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the minutes stand approved. The main event for this evening. This is case number 15 PLND 0117, a request for approval of a planned development and special uses for construction of a building at 601 Davis Street. This is a public hearing on the proposed development. Our purpose this evening is to gather facts and information regarding the proposed development and prepare a recommendation to the City Council. That recommendation may be for approval of the request, for approval with conditions, or for denial of the petition. The City Council is the final determining body in this matter. We are making a recommendation to them. Let me review the procedure that will follow. This is slightly different from our usual procedure. We will begin with staff giving a brief summary of the project and of the standards by which we are to evaluate the proposal. The petitioner will then present the project and any witnesses they wish. There's no strict time for this, but I have asked if they can get it done in about 20 minutes, and they say they will try. The Commission may wish to ask questions for clarification during that presentation, but it would be preferable, if we can, to hold questions until afterward. Following the petitioner's presentation, the staff will present their recommendation on the project. At that point, commissioners may ask questions of either the petitioner and the petitioner's witnesses or of the staff. We'll do both of those simultaneously. We will then allow members of the public to ask questions of the petitioner or of the staff. This will be questions only. Statements will be held to a later point in the evening. And those questions must be relevant to the standards for approval, which staff will have reviewed, and confined to points raised by the petitioner or staff, and those questions should not be argumentative. Members of the public will then present testimony. That will be done under oath. As in the case of the questions, testimony must be relevant to the project and to the standards, and I would encourage you to avoid repetition. If someone has already said what you want to say, simply confirm what they've said rather than repeating the whole statement. We will take testimony from any organization which wishes to speak first, and that testimony will be limited to 10 minutes. After that, we will take testimony from individuals. We'll do that in the order in which you have signed in, and individual testimony will be limited to 2 minutes. At the conclusion of public testimony, the petitioner may ask questions of the public who have testified. The petitioner may make a brief closing statement, including rebuttal of public testimony or staff comments. Staff may then make a brief closing statement, and we will close the public record. Commission will then proceed to its deliberation, including evaluation of the project against the required standards and to a recommendation to the City Council. The Commission may, if it chooses, continue the hearing to a future date in order to secure additional information. And that continuance must be done to a date and time certain, which will be announced before the meeting is continued. If a continuance is agreed on, there will be no further notice, no further public notice. In addition, any person or group with an ownership or leasehold interest within 1,000 feet of the subject property may request and will be granted one continuance for the purpose of presenting evidence to rebut testimony given by the petitioner. That request for continuance may be made at any time after the petitioner completes their opening statement. It must be in writing. The continuance will be granted, but we may continue to take testimony this evening. If we do that, just in order to save the time of people who are here and may not want to come back next time, if we do that, the person who asks for the continuance or organization who asks for the continuance will be the first speaker at the continued meeting. If you testify tonight and there is a continuance, you will not be allowed to testify at that second session, and you will remain under oath. Now, any of you who expect to speak or may be asked to speak, I need to put you under oath. If you raise your right hand. Promise to tell the truth in this proceeding? Yes. Thank you. All right. Who's going to do the staff presentation? Ms. Jones, carry on. Well, let me ask, are there questions on procedure? Okay, go.
No, you're fine. Okay, good evening, Chair Ford and members of the Plan Commission. I am Megan Jones, Neighborhood and Land Use Planner. I am going to pretty quickly give an overview of the project and go over the standards and requirements from the zoning code with regards to this particular project. First, the applicant is requesting approval of the plan development, which includes 8 site development allowances for the height, number of units, number of parking spaces, the FAR, 2 ziggurat setbacks, the number of loading berths, and a curb cut on Davis Street. And they're also requesting a special use for the inclusion of a drive-through facility. Some general project characteristics. The actual property size is 27,841 square feet, or 0.64 acres. The building size is 457,699 gross square feet, which includes 7,481 square feet of commercial space. They are proposing to have 318 dwelling units within the building. That breaks down to 58 studios, 136 one-bedroom units, 98 two-bedroom units, and 26 three-bedroom units. There will be 176 total parking spaces on site, which will include car share spaces, which the number has yet to be determined. This breaks down to 0.55 parking spaces per unit, or 0.38 parking spaces per bedroom. And overall, the height of the building is 33 stories, which breaks down to 353 feet, or if we exclude the levels that are dedicated to parking, that is 313 feet. This is a diagram that I believe the applicant will probably go over in a little bit more detail. This is the ground floor. It shows the various access points, including the entrance to the residential portion of the building, as well as how the drive-through facility interacts with the site, as well as the drop-off area that is just east of the newly constructed building, but it will be in front of the university building, which is proposed to stay as part of the development. To break down the site development allowances that are being requested, again, there are 8. The first one being the number of dwelling units. The required or maximum that are permitted in the D3 district is 93. There are no site development allowances that would be granted for that one. They are proposing 318. For building height, the maximum base height in the D3 district is 85 feet, which does not include the parking levels. This can go up to 220 feet, which also does not include the parking levels if they are granted a site development allowances. The proposed project is 313 feet, not including the parking levels, or 353 feet if we do include the 4 levels of parking. The floor area ratio for the D3 district has a base of 4.5 with a site development allowance that goes up to 8. The proposed FAR for this particular project is 12.25, which does exceed the maximum site development allowances, as do the building height. The number of parking spaces that would be required for this development would be 267. What is proposed is 176 on-site parking spaces. The number of loading berths that would be required are 5. This project is proposing 3, which includes 1 existing loading dock that is off of Chicago Avenue. They are also requesting a site development allowance for a curb cut or driveway between the building and the right-of-way along Davis Street. This is not allowed. There's no curb cut or driveway access that is allowed between the building and the right-of-way. There are 2 different ziggurat setbacks that they're requesting variances for. The first is along the north property line. They should have, as a requirement within this district and along Davis Street, a 25-foot setback at a height of 42 feet. This project is proposing 21.6 feet at a height of 58 feet. The second ziggurat setback, which would be required along Davis Street, would need to be a 40-foot setback at a height of 42 feet. And this particular project is proposing 29.3 feet at a height of 58 feet. The public benefits that are proposed include up to $25,000 to support, or $25,000, excuse me, to support sponsorships and events in Fountain Square. Up to $20,000 contribution for art featured in Fountain Square. A $50,000 contribution to support biking in Evanston, and this may include a divvy station, bike parking near that intersection of Chicago Avenue and Davis Street, or CTA station improvements. They will also have, as I mentioned earlier, incorporation of car share spaces on the site. They will have milled and repaved the alley from Davis Street to the northern boundary of the project property line, and milled, resurfaced, and patched Davis Street curb lane adjacent to the project. They will also be providing streetscape improvements along Davis Street and Chicago Avenue, which will include lighting, a new sidewalk, landscaping, and bollards that would protect the existing bike lane. They will be pursuing a LEED Gold certification, which is above the required LEED Silver. They will be providing utilization of measures to mitigate harm to migratory birds. They are committing to hiring and working with minority business enterprises, women business enterprises, disadvantaged business enterprises, and small business enterprises for the project. This will include MBE or WBE subcontractors and suppliers that would make up 10% of the construction budget. They are also committing to having a contractor that is committed to job training and administering of Green Advantage contract or content to subcontractors, building engineers, and interns or apprentices, including a third-party administered exam for a Green Advantage certified practitioner. They will be accommodating space within their building for an Evanston nonprofit or another neighborhood tenant with a history in Evanston. And finally, they will be proposing to do upgrades to the university building, which is an Evanston landmark, should the planned development proceed. So that's a general overview of the project. We can go over the standards or save that until after the applicant has presented.
I think we should have a look at the standards. We'll save your comments on the standards until a little
Gotcha.
bit.
Well, quickly, the development has to satisfy the following standards, which are addressed within our staff report. The first section being Section 63510, or standards for special uses. The second being Section 6369, or standards for planned developments. And the final one being 61110, or standards and guidelines for planned developments within the D3 Downtown Core Development District. And this is just general guidelines for our downtown districts in general. All right. So to list the special use standards for planned developments, for section 63510, the standards that have to be met would be 1, it is one of the special uses specifically listed in the zoning ordinance. 2, it is in keeping with the purposes and policies of the adopted comprehensive general plan and the zoning ordinance as amended from time to time. 3, it will not cause a negative cumulative effect when its effect is considered in conjunction with the cumulative effect of various special uses of all types in the immediate neighborhood and the effect of the proposed type of special use upon the city as a whole. 4, it does not interfere with or diminish the value of property in the neighborhood. 5, it can be adequately served by public facilities and services. 6, it does not cause undue traffic congestion. 7, it preserves significant historical and architectural resources. 8, it preserves significant natural and environmental features. And finally, 9, it complies with all other applicable regulations of the district which it is located and other applicable ordinances except to the extent such regulations have been modified through the plan development process or the grant of a variation. So that is special use standards for the plan development. Okay. The standards for plan development are section 6369. This particular standard is as a special use. Plan development involves such special considerations of the public interest that it shall be required to adhere to the specific plan development standard established in the zoning district in which it is located. Compliance with the standards shall govern the recommendations of the Plan Commission applicable to a plan development and the action of the City Council in order to ensure that an approved plan development is in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the zoning ordinance. The Plan Commission shall not recommend approval of, nor shall the City Council approve a plan development unless each shall determine, based on written finding of facts, that the plan development satisfies the specific standards established in the zoning district in which the plan development is located. The next section, this is actually one slide of 2. These next couple of slides address the specific standards and guidelines for downtown districts in general. So I can go through each one of these, or
Can you summarize them? Each of them?
generally speaking, these some of them actually repeat some of the initial guidelines and regulations that I stated previously. For this section, they do address some of the zoning requirements that we've addressed previously within some of the other slides. They also speak to specific design elements that should be considered when looking at the project. And for actually the next section, it speaks to some of the requirements for the plan development, which including a market study, a traffic impact study, considering different access points of the project, and looking forward, requirements for when the project would have to be constructed, and if any extensions would be granted if needed.
Megan, flip back 2 slides. Next one. Okay. Now, we are in making a decision to make a finding that the proposed development does or does not meet each of these standards, yes?
Yes.
It is my understanding, and I want to be sure of this, that consistency or compliance with the inclusionary housing ordinance is not included among those standards, and that the determination of compliance with the IHO is a matter on which the council must rule, not the commission. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, so if we want to
Okay.
move ahead, we can have the applicant
Thanks.
present.
Okay, Mr. Cocaine?
All right.
Thanks, Megan. Good evening, Chairman Ford and members of the Plan Commission. My name is Dave Cocaine, and I'm with Vermilion Development. Thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. This evening, I'll overview a little bit about our project team and the chronology of the project's evolution. From there, Devin from SCB will talk about the site context and the design of the project itself. And I'll conclude by talking about some of the benefits, both those recognized as public benefits and otherwise, that the project will bring to the community and to downtown Evanston. So to begin, we have combined a team that has significant local experience, longtime ownership in the Evanston community, and deep expertise in urban development and revitalization. Specifically, SCB, our architect, has done 2 projects in recent times that are well regarded and within just a few blocks of this site. Kettle Camp and Kettle Camp is a locally based Evanston landscape firm that has done projects throughout the community. Greg DiStefano is a longtime Evanston resident who has been involved in many of the most salient projects in Evanston's history and is currently developing 828 Noyes. Remark Corporation has been a property owner here for 70 years in the Evanston community of the University Building. When combined with the experience of Vermilion and Campbell Coyle, we think we have assembled a team that can execute very capably on this project, and one that will be compelling for downtown. Turning to Vermilion's background, one of our core missions as an organization is urban redevelopment and revitalization. To give you a few examples of that, this is a project we undertook in Hyde Park in concert with the City of Chicago and the University of Chicago, transforming an old parking lot and a tired retail center into a vibrant mixed-use project that has re-anchored the 53rd Street corridor. Not only has it received accolades from the land use community, but more importantly, it's received accolades from the people who live and work in Hyde Park. More recently, and closer to Evanston, we're taking an old gas station that was contaminated and transforming it into a retail and residential project that will re-anchor this important corridor in East Lakeview. We're also one of the Midwest's largest developers of affordable housing with services. We house people with disabilities, homelessness, and seniors, and provide support services to them in addition to housing. And we've brought that experience to bear on the inclusionary housing proposal that we've put forth. So it's really our experience, in particular in revitalizing underutilized sites, that attracted us to this opportunity 3.5 years ago. Now, as we're all aware, and I think all of you are familiar with the site as it exists today, these sites are certainly underutilized, in contrast with maybe some of the other sites that have been considered for development recently. The Chase drive-through, as staff has noted, has an 80-foot or so curb cut. It's been in existence for decades. And absent this project, will continue to exist in that condition for many decades to come. We will transform that. We will reduce the size of it to make it take it from one of the most intrusive curb cuts on the protected bike lanes on Davis and Church to one of the least intrusive curb cuts on Davis and Church. Additionally, the University Building, the lot immediately west of the University Building, has sat vacant for years, and as you can see, even has exposed foundations. So this is a site that clearly needs reinvigoration. It really doesn't fit with the downtown plan in terms of the use or its appearance. Now, like many redevelopment projects involving complicated sites, this one has evolved over a very long period of time. We've spent 3.5 years working with land ownership and city staff and others to try to bring this project to a point where we could present it to you. We began in August of 2014 and sat down with staff for the first time at the end of 2014, about 3 years ago, almost to the day. We spent over 2 years negotiating with Chase to enable the acquisition of their property, and I can tell you other developers over time had approached Chase about combining it with the parcel that's owned by the university building, and were not successful in doing that. So we spent a long time working to get Chase to the table and enable a development that would accomplish some of the goals of the downtown plan while also accommodating Chase's business needs. As this project has evolved, obviously lots of changes have occurred in Evanston over 3.5 years. Development interest has accelerated. The project itself has evolved. There's a new inclusionary housing ordinance that relates to for-rent projects, of which we are one. The project has evolved. City staff has turned over. But what has remained constant during that period of time is our dedication to taking this underutilized site, these lots that have incompatible land uses, and transforming them into something that contributes to the vibrancy and vitality of downtown Evanston. So to share with you a little bit more about how we intend to do that, I would like to introduce Devin from SCB, who's going to talk about the project's design and how it fits in the overall context of downtown. Devin? Hit the button on the right to advance it.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Devin Patterson. I'm a principal at Solomon Cordwell Benz. We're an architecture firm located in Chicago and also an office in San Francisco. Our designs are focused on developing urban downtown areas, and we do that successfully around the country. We've done a couple projects here as well in Evanston, so we're glad to be back here. We've had a very successful process of working over the last year with the city staff, community members, and various other organizations to try to come up with a building that meets a lot of different purposes and a lot of different ideas for the site. And so we want to share with you that vision for the site. And just a couple of the guiding principles that we've really used as the way we've developed the design for this project really came from the development team, and so were given to us as really the things we wanted to encourage us to do as we started to think about how to develop this project. First, we wanted a community-focused downtown destination. This is at the heart of the walkable area of downtown Evanston, and we want that to be a proud moment on the street there. We also wanted to preserve a historic landmark of Evanston. The university building has a special place in a lot of people's hearts, and we want to have that be a part of this development and keep it the way it is and restore it back to some of its original glory. We also want this to be an economic catalyst for the neighborhood that really utilizes this underutilized piece of property in downtown Evanston. And we also want this to be a sustainable project. As we talked about, we're striving for a LEED Gold project here, which is a very high standard for a residential building. Just to give you some of the vision about how we've come up with the building that we've designed, that we think is the appropriate response to this site. This site sits at kind of the center of your downtown, adjacent to many modes of transportation and many areas of walkability. And so we think having density and residential use this close to some of the train stations and the CTA stations is an appropriate response for this neighborhood here. And if you look at this diagram here, we have it up here. We also have a model that's adjacent to me on the right-hand side here. But when you look at the buildings that are already in the existing neighborhood here, we have Sherman Plaza right here. We have the Park Evanston, the Rotary Tower, the Chase Building. There's 4 buildings that are of substantial height in this neighborhood here. And when you look at our building, we think that it fits appropriately in that neighborhood of taller buildings at the center of downtown Evanston. If you also look at the way that the street is organized, If you look at Davis Street as it goes through the city here, there's a variety of different building heights that are there, from older buildings that were built across the street over here to the university building, to the buildings that are adjacent to us across the street, to some of the some of the new buildings that have been built to the west. And as you see, there's a variety of different heights here. It's not a consistent 42 feet as the code would like you to believe that this height should be. There's a variety of different heights, and I think that creates a variety of interest to that street. And so I think what we wanted to do as we looked at this is find something in our building that's compatible with the variety of heights that are along the street front here. And we talked about some of the allowances that we're looking for the building to be built on the site here. This diagram illustrates some of the setbacks, some of the ziggurat setbacks that we're encroaching in. And one of them is the rear yard setback. If you look at the previous photograph, it encroaches on a parking lot, which is to the north of us here. So we didn't see that as a major issue. I think the one we looked at the most as tried to get as much setback as we possibly could was along Davis Street here. So we've reduced that from 40 feet to 29 foot 4 inches in that location above the 58 feet points there. So we're a little taller than the code allows, but we think we've got an appropriate architectural response that helps to mitigate that height issue along there. The other thing I want to make very clear too is one of the things that we did in this design is we preserved in its entirety the university building. We have not encroached on the airspace above that. The building sets on the property line between the two projects, and so there is no encroachment over the top of it, which we think is an important thing. It was a decision that was made early on to do this, which allowed us to have less development area on the site to develop potentially a shorter building. Because we did not want to go over the top of that existing building there. We think that's a good civic gesture. Just to show you how the building is organized from a stacking diagram here, the ground floor has blue, which is the retail on the street here. We have the residential entrance, which is adjacent to the university building. We have 4 levels of parking above that. We have an outdoor amenity deck that overlooks Davis Street and so it'll be an active piece to see from the ground level there. We have a indoor amenity space for the residents there. There's also an outdoor amenity space on the north side of the building that you've not seen here. The residential units are stacked on top of that. The mechanical for the building is at the top and mainly enclosed except for the elevator overrun. That's at the top of the building here. And there's a small community space at the top of the building for the residents of the building to get the views from the top towards downtown Chicago or the lakefront or Evanston. But getting back to that issue of size and compatibility and appropriateness of our proposal here, this is another diagram that illustrates in a different way the street heights along Davis Street here. And this is a larger context that goes a block to the east and then a block to the west of our site here. And you can see there are a variety of different heights of scales along the street. These towers are set back. There's a slight variation between our building and the building that's to the left of us there, the Chase building there. So you can see contextually, we think that the building fits in the context of the neighborhood. And when you look across the street, this also illustrates the variety of different cornice lines, roof lines that are proposed or that exist across the street from us. So it's not just an even line across there. So we've tried to respond to that architecturally. And in developing that podium design, this is our podium right here. This is an elevation of the north side of the street. What you're seeing here is our building, the university building in its entirety preserved, the Chase building with its pavilion out front here. And so when you look across the street, we worked very hard to develop a pattern and architecture that responds to the scale and the texture of the buildings across the street. We have a variety of different heights of cornice lines here. We've also taken the apertures of the windows, which are the kind of the voids of the facades, as opposed to the brick or to the precast or the other materials that make up those facades along there. And we use that scale to develop the pattern of the windows on our building here, which we think successfully really integrates our building with the rest of Davis Street in a very successful way. The other thing we wanted to show is how the ground floor works of this development, and we've worked with city staff to try to find the best connections to the street, to the dedicated bike path, and to the alley for this development. The university building sits here. It has a loading dock that's off of Chicago Avenue over here. The residential entrance is right here. As we mentioned earlier here, we're proposing a drop-off, which is adjacent to the corner here for residents, Uber, things like that, to drop off and go into the building here. There's a direct access from the dedicated bike path into this dashed line represents a path to the bike storage for the building, straight from that path there, which we think is one of the first that's been done on this street here. And then we have a curb cut here, which was mentioned before. Currently, there's an 85-foot curb cut on the street there. We have minimized the curb cut down to 16 feet in this location here, and that provides the drive-through access for Chase in the building. And so it's one lane in and 2 lanes out, and there's an ATM on the alley there. And we've got some things, we've also done quite a bit of study on these things, and I can go over in a few minutes here. And the alley provides access for the drive-through, provides access to the loading, and also provides access to the parking entrance in this location here. And we've worked with the city's landscape ordinances to populate trees along the street here that also improve the vitality of the street. So looking at this building architecturally, we wanted to show you how we've been really considering this. This building is actually seen pretty prominently from Fountain Square, and we wanted to illustrate that in this rendering that you see up here on the screen. But if you look at the building model that's to the right of me here, you can see that this really becomes a nice backdrop to this plaza that's established right now in front of Chase. We've actually developed all 4 sides of this building's facades, primarily because we want to have an elegant facade that's seen from Fountain Square. I know the city's making a huge investment into that park, so we want this building to contribute to the success visually from that park. We also think that because the building is set back from that park, the height should not be an issue from that point. This also shows just another view, slightly elevated here, because in this one you can't really see the heights or the buildings that are adjacent to us here. But once you elevate, you start to see how our podium, which is right here, really kind of is in a similar scale and height to the buildings across the street. And as you look at the tower as it rises up from the podium, it transitions from a more solid podium that really responds to the materiality of Davis Street to something glassy that is glassy and metal panel facade that really is more successful for residential viewing and for marketing for the building. And then I talked about how we've been working with the city staff. We've been working with Design Evanston. We've been working with Bird Friendly in Evanston to develop a podium that really is a successful building. And you can see we've got 2 different versions of it here. There's the upper version and the lower version. And the lower version is, through a tremendous amount of work with all the people I mentioned before, is to show how we were able to reduce the height of that. We were actually able to take, I think, 6 feet out of that area there. We've also refined the detailing of that. The facades themselves before were larger solid panels. It was a variety of different materials. Now we've unified it to a brick facade, which you'll see on all 3 sides of the building from the street here. The scale of the brick is consistent with what you find on the opposite side of the street. We've actually used a normal Norman brick, which has a modular height to it, but a horizontal length a little bit longer than a typical modular brick, which we think is appropriate for this scale of building. And we have three different fronts. We have a front that's this one here. We have a second one that's in the center here, and then a third one. So it's really demarking the three. There's two different retail areas here, and then the residential entrance is called out with a special kind of taller element there that calls out architecturally where the entrance is. The building next door is obviously the university building, which remains intact. But you can see a lot of back and forth with a lot of different individuals has yielded something that I think is considerably better than when we first started. And these also, I wanted to illustrate how this is really working from a perspective standpoint. This is looking east down Davis Street here. We're just in front of the east side, the west side of the building. As you approach it from Fountain Square here, you can see that the facade, the care of the facade that's on the street front has been carried around to the west side of the building here. There's translucent windows in that location, so the garage will be enclosed. You won't be able to see into the space during the daytime. It'll glow at night, so it'll look like an active space here. And then we've actually been working with artists in the neighborhood in the city of Evanston to try to develop a glass mosaic that would become an art installation that would be permanently in the facade of this building here, and it really becomes a canvas for the residents, for the neighborhood. And this is really on that backdrop there. And a part of the tower also actually kind of tucks down into that to create a little bit more of a playful relationship of the tower to the podium rather than the two being distinctly different. You can also see how we've worked with varying heights of cornices, parapets on the building to create distinction on that street so it does not look like one even facade, even though it is a similar height. And then this is looking back towards the west. You can see Sherman Plaza out there in the distance. You can see the university building in the foreground. You can see, again, the materiality, the brick that has been carried around to the west or the east facade in this building here. We tried to develop a building that had a character that was distinct from the university building, but also complemented it here. So we're looking at a brick material here that's kind of a gray material with a little bit of an flash of glaze, so it's got a variety. It looks like it's aged. It looks like it's fit into this downtown neighborhood for many years. And it would be very distinct from the limestone building, which is the university building next door. So it really helps to kind of accentuate the beauty of that existing building here. So,
Mr. Patterson, if there's anything important you need to tell us beyond design, I think you better do it.
Okay. I think I'm just about ready to wrap up. I just wanted to explain a couple of things that we've done as far as the studies that have been done on the project. We've done parking studies. Our Terra group is with us here today, so they can answer questions, but they feel as though the parking is appropriate for this building. We've also had KOLOA, our traffic consultant, look at the impact on the alley. We've also done traffic studies for the neighborhood, and we've also done impacts of the drive-through through the building, all of which we feel are mitigated. We think that the project will not generate any more traffic to the neighborhood. The alley impact is minimal, and he can elaborate on that further. But that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Devin. In the interest of time, I'll go quickly through these last few slides. So let me finally turn to the project's benefits, the impact that it has on downtown and to the community. First, as Devin mentioned, we are preserving an historic structure in Evanston that's over 100 years old. Like many historic buildings, this building is in need of significant investment to make it viable for the future. Frankly, if we were looking at it strictly from an economic perspective, it would be much easier to tear the building down and use that area, which would allow us to reduce the building's height by 60 feet, reduce the size of the parking podium, ease vehicular access, and so forth. But that's not the right decision. That's not the right way to maintain character in downtown. And so we've chosen to preserve it and, in fact, double down and invest significant dollars in its renovation. In addition, we've highlighted a number of other project attributes, some of which are explicitly recognized as community benefits, others of which are just economic impact. We talked earlier about revitalizing an underutilized site, which is really an eyesore in downtown Evanston. It detracts from the pedestrian experience and breaks up the street wall. We're adding to that many of the benefits that Megan listed earlier. I won't list them each because I think she did a good job summarizing them. And while it isn't in the purview of the Plan Commission to talk about the inclusionary housing ordinance, we have offered a very innovative program from that perspective that delivers dollars to people more quickly with more impact and at lower incomes than the existing inclusionary housing does. Finally, from a tax revenue perspective, which is very important to affordability in Evanston, we'll put about $1.5 million or so in new property taxes on the city's tax rolls, about $400,000 a year in new sales taxes, and in the near term, about $1.6 million in permit fee income for the city when we break ground and pay our permit fee. So it has a really significant economic impact, both long-term and short-term. So we appreciate the Commission's consideration. We think we brought an experienced team to execute on this project. We think it will place density where density is appropriate. It will add commercial uses to this area, which has been underutilized for many, many decades, and does so in a way that is consistent architecturally with surrounding uses. And finally, that dramatically reduces the size of the existing curb cut rather than considering us as asking for a special use permit. I think I would characterize it as we're enabling the 90% reduction of the curb cut that exists today that will otherwise stay as it is, and brings a lot of other very important benefits in terms of tax revenue, innovative affordable housing, preservation of an historic structure. So with that, we'll conclude and be happy either now or later to answer questions.
Thank you. Mr. Mangum, you're going to do the staff recommendation?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, members of the public. Scott Mangum, Planning and Zoning Administrator. As Megan pulls up the slides for us, just one brief interjection or note on the developer presentation and the slide regarding public benefits. Just as a side note that it listed the public benefits provided by the proposed development here and then compare them to other developments. The list of public benefits for the other developments is not an exhaustive list, so there are additional public benefits that some of the other projects provided that are not on that slide, just in the interest of clarity there. As for the staff recommendation, this project has been before the Design and Project Review Committee twice at 2 meetings. So staff and Design and Project Review Committee do recommend that the Plan Commission make a recommendation for denial of the special use for the proposed plan development at 601 Davis Street to the City Council. However, we have provided a list of potential conditions of approval similar to other plan developments if the project should move forward and either the Plan Commission or the City Council has a different thought about the project. And going back to the standards that the recommendation is based on, if Megan could pull up this slide, please, on the plan development standards in the D districts, the downtown districts. And as this is a long list, I certainly won't go through them all, but we'll point out the areas where staff believes that the proposed project does not meet the standards within the ordinance. Specifically, number 1, in general conditions, that we do not feel that the project is compatible with surrounding development in nature of height, bulk, or scale. As proposed, the tower would be the tallest building in Evanston and over 80 feet taller than the Chase Bank building that's nearby. Additionally, the massing of the podium is 58 feet in height, and feel that that is out of scale with the development on the block. Number 2, believe that the development does not enhance the existing streetscape amenities. The standard is to maintain retail continuity in areas where it's prominent and strengthen pedestrian orientation and scale. In this case, the ground level drive-through use as an existing use is incompatible, and its proposed use would also be incompatible in a pedestrian area downtown with the curb cut and tunnel that go along with that proposed use. That disrupts the pedestrian orientation as well as a protected bike lane, which is a recent investment of the city. Additionally, the 4 levels of parking at the front facade detracts from the pedestrian orientation and experience. And as far as the next set of standards, the site control standards, the next slide, with regards to items number 1 and 3, similarly, number 1, the walkways developed for planned development shall form a logical, safe, convenient system for pedestrian access to all project facilities. Again, the ground level drive-through, an additional curb cut crossing the sidewalk and the bike lane, creating unnecessary conflict points. And with regards to number 3, with the controlling turning movements and minimizing hazards to vehicular pedestrian traffic, again, the curb cut and drive-through interrupts those areas. And then finally, with regard to the development allowances, there are maximum allowances that are called out in the D3 district of 220 feet for height and FAR, a 3.5 additional FAR, so reaching an 8.0 max. And this proposed development does exceed those maximum allowances, the height over 90 feet higher than the 220 feet that's allowed. It's with the subtraction of the 4 levels and 40 feet for parking, and then also exceeds the maximum floor area ratio by over 50% at the 12.25 versus 8.0 with the maximum development allowance. The code does allow for a supermajority vote of the City Council to authorize developments that exceed the maximum. In this case, we do not feel that that is warranted. That's a summary of the staff's recommendation on the project. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Commissioners, questions for the petitioner? Let's do questions for the petitioner, and then we'll come back and do questions for staff. So questions for the petitioner. Commissioner Picozzi, you're reaching for your switch.
Yes, thank you. My questions, the first questions I had were about it's University Place, the historic building?
University, it's called the University Building, even though it's not owned by the university, yes.
Okay. Is that owned by, who owns that building?
So our partner, which was mentioned on the introductory slide, Remark Corporation, which owns both the University Building and the lot immediately west of it.
Okay. And then is it the landmark status? Is it a City of Evanston landmark, or is it a state?
It's a City of Evanston landmark, as I understand.
City of
it.
Evanston.
Well, I can't. Is it more than the City of Evanston? Evanston landmark.
Just
yeah.
okay, all right. So, and I don't know if you can answer this, but who governs the requirements for preservation and restoration for the building?
Commissioner Picozzi, the Evanston Preservation Commission would need to issue a certificate of appropriateness for any exterior changes, modifications to the building there. They did review the proposed development, focusing on the compatibility of the kind of base of the proposed development with the existing university building, and made a recommendation of approval based on that scope. With some conditions there, and one of those being that exterior modifications in the future would need to come back to the Preservation Commission with those details.
So that the Preservation Commission would need to basically sign off on the building permit, or the actual improvements that occur.
That's correct. A certificate of appropriateness would be needed. Since the meeting with the Preservation Commission, the developer has fleshed out some of those improvements that would be proposed there.
All right, those are my questions. Thank you.
Other questions on this side? Commissioner Isaac.
Yeah, I believe you said there's
Is your mic on?
I'm sorry. There are 4 levels of parking above grade. Mm-hmm. What's happening below grade? What uses? Is there more parking below grade?
No, there's no parking. There's no subsurface parking. No.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Picozzi, again?
That reminded me, I did have one more question about that. Was the decision not to go with any subsurface parking related to the preservation of the university building?
There were a variety of considerations. I don't want to say that was the singular consideration, but that may have been one of them, yes. I mean, we went through a quite complex analysis about all of the building's attributes and the appropriate systems and solutions, one of which was parking.
Okay, thanks.
Do you want to add anything to that, Dan?
Commissioner Lewis.
Just on the parking, this is a question for staff. It's mentioned that it's at 0.55 spaces per dwelling unit and 0.38 per bedroom or something like that. Does that meet the recommendations, recent recommendations for transit-oriented developments?
It does not. As you referenced recently, the Plan Commission recommended changing parking requirements in transit-oriented development areas for multifamily residential. City Council has since adopted that recommendation and ordinance and lowered parking requirements to 0.55 parking spaces per bedroom.
Commissioner Isaac.
Yeah, and so even with that lowering, even with the lowering of the parking requirements in the transit-oriented districts, this project has less parking than that. Is that accurate?
That is correct. A development allowance is requested for the parking with that new calculation. 267 parking spaces would be required of the development at 0.55 per unit, and 176 parking spaces are proposed.
And another question for the applicant. Are these units expected to be condominiums, apartments?
There'll be apartments.
Apartments.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is this still your, yes, okay. Commissioner Lewis again?
So I'm interested in this this drive-through. You know, it's this is a area that's perfect for pedestrian-oriented use, and you know, in most people's mind, the drive-through and the bank itself don't have to be next to each other, you know, the way modern banking is. And I'm wondering, you know, was there any land swap or any way that there was pursued a deal that could have moved, you know, the drive-through to the periphery of the downtown instead of right in the heart where it's promoting traffic? And any more creative ways to get around, you know, this, you know, in that 2-year negotiation?
Fair question, Commissioner. So one, if you look at the protected bike lanes on Davis and Church, there are roughly, among streets, alleyways, driveways, about 35 curb cuts, plus or minus. Certainly, this is one of the most intrusive of those 35. We would actually take it from from one of the worst to one of the least intrusive, being 16 feet, and even being better than what the city has at its own parking deck, a block and a half to the west. Did we have conversations with Chase about different design solutions? Absolutely. The city staff was involved in some, though not all of those. I'm not sure it was the current planning staff. I believe it's the previous folks who were involved in that. Here's the bottom line. Chase owns the property. That curb cut has existed, from what I can tell, for about 40 years. They have the right to continue to use it for that purpose if they choose. It's not only used as a bank drive-through, it's also used as a parking lot, and that's what's generated, you know, some zoning code violations over time. So yes, we did discuss with Chase other possibilities. We had a call with Chase's redevelopment representative, with Scott. And the bottom line is Chase views ATMs as critical to its future. It views them as increasing in use rather than decreasing in use, and it very carefully considered what its plan for facilities in Evanston was. The project went all the way to the CFO of JP Morgan Chase in New York for approval. And so we did our best. It's important to note that if that drive-through ever closes, we have the right to buy it back. And we have included it in our FAR calculation so that we can convert it to retail at some future point if it goes dark. But the bottom line is they're the landowner, you know, and they can impose that condition. So we tried to minimize the impact and make it, I think, a far better situation than it is today.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wasn't asking whether ATMs are valuable.
Sure.
I know in the downtown area, most people would come by foot to use an ATM, and I'm just saying, a drive-through ATM doesn't necessarily have to be in the center of downtown, where first of all, it's hard to get to driving-wise because there's a lot of traffic, and there are other places on the periphery that still could be serviced. So I was, wondering if there was, you could do it in some other way by just moving it a little bit,
There was significant discussion with them, but at the end of the day, it was their determination that this is where they want it to be.
Commissioner Isaac or Commissioner Saul?
Me.
Okay, and then Commissioner Dubin.
Just going back to something you just mentioned, the drive-through.
Yes.
Is it going to be? Is that area then going that airspace? Is that going to be owned by Chase?
Yes, it would be
Okay.
owned by Chase. So we would condominiumize that area, and then we, as I said, have the right to buy it back.
Okay. So you would have the right to buy it back.
Right.
Would you be willing to agree to a discontinuance of the drive-through in the event
The Chase,
Chase let
absolutely,
it go.
yes. We would be very pleased to eliminate it and use it as commercial space.
Okay.
So we would agree to that, yes, Commissioner.
Thank you.
How many other entities use that alley for deliveries, large trucks, parking garage, exit and entrance?
Our traffic engineer is here, so I'm going to let him respond to that question.
Lou Abuna with KLOA. So based on our counts, the drive-through is being used by other entities along the alleys being used by other businesses over an hour period. Let me just find the data here. I apologize. There's about 85 two-way trips in the morning and about 125 trips, two-way trips in the evening that uses the alley. Alley is about 20 feet wide. It's not encumbered by any obstructions or poles or street standards, street lights. So it's an alley, but it really operates as a street. So it operates well in terms of carrying the traffic that it carries today, and we believe that it also will be adequate in accommodating the traffic that would be generated by the garage and by our delivery trucks.
What other things would be used in there? You'd have garbage pickup. I'm not sure if the Whole Foods delivery is up at that end. That you wouldn't see it during rush hour, but it happens during the day, and
Right.
that could be. Is that
I mean,
significant?
and when we did our observations, we did not. We didn't observe any significant truck movements during the rush hour, which is when our traffic would peak. So, for example, in the morning there were no trucks observed, and in the evening there were one or two trucks that were observed. And even at times that we observed trucks and even a semi sitting at the alley delivering at the Whole Foods, there was enough room. One time I was there was a single unit truck that was coming down the alley, and there was a semi sitting, and that single unit truck was able to pass through and not be obstructed by the semi.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess I have Commissioner Goddard? Go ahead.
I'm trying to justify in my mind why the scale of this is so intense. Is there any remediation you have to do to that site that?
From an environmental perspective?
Yeah, are there special things you're going to have to do to clean it up?
I don't believe there's any, I don't recall there being any significant what are called recognized environmental conditions. I think what we are trying to accommodate, as I mentioned earlier, is preservation of an historic building, which really does drive some design constraints for the site. As I said, we've looked at if that were not there, and again, that's not something we're advocating for, but it is a design constraint that maybe other projects haven't adhered to. The building would be about 60 feet lower in height, so it'd be around the same height as the Chase Tower. The parking podium would be one floor less. So I think inherent in trying to do historic preservation, there are constraints that come along with that.
So in an informal sort of way, you're asking for a transfer of development rights off of the university building to the rest of the site? Not legally, but
I suppose informally, if you want to
effectively.
think of it that way. I mean, it is included
Okay.
in the plan development ordinance, yes.
yeah, okay. I do have a question about the public benefits.
Sure.
In the list we have, your first two are up to $25,000 to support sponsorships and events in Fountain Square, and up to $20,000 contribution for art featured in Fountain Square. I guess I have two questions.
Sure.
Up to, what are the criteria that you will use to decide how far up you go, and what are your no less than numbers? What's the guarantee?
Let's make this easy. Let's say it's 25,020 rather than up to. Fair question.
Good answer. Thank you. Commissioner Lewis.
So I just want to ask a question based on the previous question. Was the university building site area and floor area used in the calculations of the FAR and the allowable calculations, or?
Yes, Commissioner Lewis. So the proposed FAR of 12.25 includes the square footage of the university building as well as the land area of the university building. If you were to subtract out the land area, it'd probably be somewhere around 16 or so of an FAR.
Yeah, it's more of an issue of height than it is FAR. Scott's absolutely right. It's in the FAR calculation.
Now, are there questions for staff? I do have one. Megan, can you find in your summary the table of requested development allowances? That one. Yeah. Now, I want to be sure I understand this. In the middle column, site development allowance, for building height, you've said 220 feet, not including up to 4 floors of parking. And then the proposed is 313 feet or 353, including the parking levels. Do I understand then that the site development allowance, if you included the 4 floors of parking, would be about 260, an additional 40 feet?
That is correct.
Okay, so that the comparables here are 220 to 313 and about 260 to 353.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay. All right. If there are no further questions, there's a further
Commissioner,
questions
Yeah, I have a few questions for staff.
for staff? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I checked the zoning map, and it appears that the Chase building itself is a planned development, and the area that's included in this planned development is outside of that area. I wanted to ask staff if they've confirmed that the map is accurate, that when the Chase building was developed, whether this drive-through area that's obviously part of that development, whether that was included, whether that site was included as part of the planned development request. And if not, I would ask staff to just investigate and report back to the commission.
Yeah, I don't believe we have any reason to believe that that it is part of the planned development on the site to the west, but we could look and see what documentation we can find to confirm that.
Okay. And then the other question is, this harkens back to a time before I was sitting in the Plan Commission. There was a discussion about a project at the called the Fountain Tower Square, or Fountain Square Tower. It was going to be like 500 feet plus, that ultimately got approved at a lower height. But I remember in reading articles about those discussions that there was an issue with the fire department being able to reach and address any kind of emergencies in a building of that height. And so what I don't recall is whether there were still those concerns and the tower that got approved ended up being approved, or whether that it got lowered as a result. Do you have the answer to that question?
Good evening, Johanna Leonard, Community Development Director. I was actually sitting in that seat when that development came through because I was on the Plan Commission at that time. So at the time, there was concern about the rate and ability that the fire department and cooperating agencies would be able to reach individuals in that building if there was a fire. And the fire chief at the time, Chief Burkowski, came and spoke to the Plan Commission and provided an overview of how a fire in high-rise would be fought, how they're trained to handle that, and the different fire suppression systems that would be included in that building. And it's an interesting comment you bring up because we were literally just talking about this today in a staff meeting about the inclusion of fire suppression systems in this level of a discussion for a development review. So that would be something that the fire department would work with us if this was approved and moved forward for a building permit. But that was not why the building was lowered. It came in, I think, originally at 49 stories, and it was approved by City Council at about 35 ultimately. But it came down for other reasons.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions for staff? All right, then, are there any questions for either the developer or staff from the public? Questions here, not comments. Yes, sir, down. Yes.
Are we going by the names on the list?
No, I'm asking, the names on the list will be for testimony,
Okay.
statements. I'm asking now for questions.
And then I do have just a few questions.
Come on up to the podium.
Okay. I'll give you my name. My name's Hank Goldman. I live at 807 Davis Street, which is less than a block from the supposed blighted area that the developers talked about. So my questions are, with over 13,000 apartments in Evanston and probably about another 1,000 to come online with some of the proposals, how does the developer think that they are going to make their apartments more affordable, and why people would jump to their places? And if they do, are they going to come from existing apartments and leave those to come to theirs? That's my first question. My second question was, why do they think they can entice retail when so many others over the years in Evanston have made that same statement and failed? Third question is, how is it not going to add to what's an already horrendous wind tunnel effect in the downtown? And Joanna mentioned it, but I had it down here. What will the impact be on police, fire, EMS, et cetera?
Thank you. All right. Mr. Cocaine, yeah.
So I think there were 4 questions. I'm going to address the first 2 and then ask our architect to address the wind tunnel question and then come back on the police and fire. So relative to the market's ability to absorb these additional 320 units as a part of the process that we go through, we did a very comprehensive market study on the Evanston market to determine whether there was indeed demand for these units. And just as importantly, when we go to get this financed, we will have banks and equity investors looking very carefully at our underwriting to confirm that indeed that these units are supportable. In terms of where do these people come from, will there be some natural migration within Evanston? I suspect there will be. I think it will also appeal to perhaps a new audience that is looking for this kind of product. For example, 40% of our units are 2- and 3-bedroom apartments, which is a much higher ratio than some of the other projects that have been proposed. So I think that appeals to a very different target audience than might studios or 1-bedroom apartments. So that's question 1. Question 2, with regard to retailers. First, let me say we as a company have significant experience in retail development. The Hyde Park project, which I mentioned earlier, had about 75,000 square feet of retail. Comparatively, this project has around 7,000 or 8,000 square feet of retail. So we're pretty experienced when it comes to leasing retail space. And in fact, we've already had some preliminary discussions with one in use in particular that we think would be very exciting for downtown. So given the relatively modest amount of retail square footage, we're very confident in our ability to lease it. And as I said, we've already had some preliminary discussions with a particular local retailer. Devin, would you like to address the wind tunnel question?
Regarding wind on the site, that's a concern for the development as far as the entrance to the building is concerned. Also, those elevated roof decks for the amenity space. So as part of our design process, should this get approved, we would work with a wind engineer. Typically, we work with RWIDI out of Canada that would do a wind tunnel test of this project and develop a strategy for mitigating wind off of the building so that the pedestrian level winds wouldn't be exceeding, I don't know what we can promise, but we could work on that. And also the upper level setbacks would be mitigated as well. So there would be devices. Sometimes there are shelves that are put there. There's sometimes vertical elements. It depends on how the wind is hitting the building and how it's coming off of other buildings in the neighborhood. We have not done that study to date, but we would do it as part of the design process should this move forward.
And then finally, with regard to police and fire, Johanna covered the fire piece of it, I think, pretty well. Obviously, the building will be designed in accordance with the standards articulated by the local fire department as well as the building inspection department of the city to make sure that there are sufficient fire suppression systems in the building to mitigate any, unfortunate fire incident. From the perspective of impact on police, we don't anticipate a significant impact from that perspective. And as I mentioned earlier, obviously the building will generate real estate taxes to help offset any burden that it places on municipal services.
Thank you. I had a hand back here.
I have a couple of questions for the developer. One.
Your name, sir?
My name is Ivan Hall.
Thank you.
One, I think it was number 7 on one of these numerous video screens we've watched. I don't know how you can say this won't have an impact on somebody's property when, say, the people living in Sherman Plaza.
Mr. Hall,
yes?
This sounds like an argumentative question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Ask a
I'm
straight
sorry.
question.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. The question was, I was wondering how the property values in the surrounding area wouldn't be affected negatively. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I would also wonder how the congestion and parking that's already rather severe in that area would not be adversely affected with what the city has already said is inadequate. Those are my 2 questions.
Thank you. Okay.
So with regard to property values, as a general matter, the addition of new kind of leading edge projects are generally viewed as accretive for other properties in the area. And as you can see, while we are proximate to Sherman Plaza, we're not, next door to it. There's a significant distance between our project and it. With regard to parking and traffic, our traffic engineers already addressed the traffic question. Why don't you address the parking question, if you would? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kyle Smith with the Antero Group, and I am the primary author of the parking study for this project. With regard to parking, I want to point out a couple of trends that are national, regional, and local that are very salient to this building. Among those who rent, particularly those under 35 and over 65, people are tending to park and own cars a little bit less than they used to. And that is something that holds true in our region and actually holds true in downtown Evanston. Out of the 4,500 households in downtown Evanston, about a third don't own a car. And about 45% of renters own no cars, 45% of renters under 35 don't own cars, and over 65% of renters over 65 don't own cars. Now that's in downtown Evanston. That's not a citywide number, but those are the target markets for this particular building. I am a architect of something called designed by the Center for Neighborhood Technology, called the ETOD Social Impact Calculator, that estimates the peak parking demand for this building at peak time when everyone's asleep from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. Monday through Thursday. And we estimate between 158 and 174 spaces generated by this building, largely because of the trends that I just mentioned to you elsewhere in downtown Evanston. So we feel very confident that the parking number in this building is accurate and rightly sized to the demographics it serves.
Thank you. Libby, Ms. Hill.
My name is Libby Hill, and I wanted to address the question to the developers. When you last appeared at DAPR, you talked about the fact that you hadn't had enough time.
Stay with the mic, Libby.
That you hadn't had enough time to actually develop bird-friendly adaptations to your original design. And you didn't mention tonight how you had dealt with the glass railing, which is a very big problem at the podium, and the podium in general with landscaping. So I was wondering how you had dealt with that.
Thank you very much. We have been working on the development of the podium, which is the primary area of concern for bird strikes because it's the lowest portion of the building and the birds fly around the treetop levels. And so we've focused our effort on reducing bird strikes to the building because of what we've done is we've reduced the amount of transparent glass in that location there. So the 4 floors, that are above the ground floor would be translucent glass that would not be reflective, so it's not creating a fly-through zone there. The only places where we would have transparent glass would be at the retail on the ground floor and the lobby to the residential building. And we've reduced that down to about 15% of the overall podium facade, which is within the LEED criteria for bird-friendly podiums. So that was the way we've mitigated the bird issues at the ground floor. You talk about the guardrail at the podium level from the amenities down, and I guess we haven't developed that detail further. That'll be part of wind mitigation on the site. So I think we would continue to develop that further as the project progresses.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. This is a question more directed to the Commission. Could you explain what precludes you this evening from discussing with regard to this project, what precludes you from discussing how it aligns or doesn't align with our inclusionary housing ordinance? I mean, this is such an important topic, and I know, as I've seen through our co-urbanize, this really flies right in the face, barely offering any units, and I find it a little bit shameful that this isn't a top priority. Now it has been in the past, and why you're precluding yourselves from even discussing it.
Well, my brief answer, which I gave earlier, and I'll ask Councilor Tretto to add to this if he needs to, is that we are given a set in the ordinance of specific set of standards which a project must meet when it's brought to us, on which we must make a written finding. The IHO is not included within those standards, and it is a matter for the council's determination.
And why is it not included this time on those standards? Why do we suddenly why aren't city staffers concerned this time in their recommendation to you to look at this? Last time it was. And it's really, 4 units out of 318. This needs to be discussed. I'd like to know why this hasn't been listed.
Mario Tretto, Assistant City Attorney. Just to discuss, the inclusionary housing ordinance is part of the development. That is something that will be reviewed by the City Council. It's exactly what Chairman Ford said. It's not part of the standard that is up for review at this point.
Why?
It's outside of this jurisdiction. That's how the zoning code reads.
Well, so for the Albion, it was discussed at length here. Why are we, for this particular building, you've exempted yourself from dealing with this, and I find it shameful.
I think, well, that's a statement rather than a question. I think we've answered the question as best we can.
I still don't quite understand why. I haven't understood the why yet. But you keep telling me
It's not a standard. That is why.
It has been in the past, but suddenly it's not?
The standards have been the same from my tenure here for the 5 years.
But over the Albion, you all discussed this at great length. So I'm still not getting a straight answer.
Yes, sir.
So regarding that you don't have a standard to discuss inclusionary housing ordinance tonight, I have a city code that I am asking about. City Code Section 6-3-5-9B states that the zoning ordinance prohibits the approval of the variance in combination with the planned development. So tonight, is it possible for Vermilion Development to ask for 8 major variances to the site development allowances and a variance to the inclusionary housing ordinance? And doesn't this violate city code?
To clarify, the requests this evening are site development allowances as opposed to variances. Those are different items within the zoning ordinance.
And given that the question of the IHO will come before City Council, or can be considered by City Council, that issue of whether that variance can be granted within the meaning of the zoning ordinance, will be taken up by them. Exactly. Precisely. Oh, they insist on having a recommendation from us. Sometimes I wonder, too. Yes, sir. Strike that.
My name is Irv Chokel, and I've been a 40-year resident of the city of Evanston. My questions for the developers are, would this project be financially and otherwise feasible without any variances that are requested? If not, what's the minimum variances you can live with?
The proposal as contemplated, no, would not be financially viable within the allowances. And in fact, as a part of the staff analysis, and there was an evaluation done of the project's financial feasibility in the context of the inclusionary housing contribution, although it was a broad look at that, and it established that basically we're earning a minimum kind of threshold of about 6% return on costs, which is in today's market what is expected for these types of projects. So we have asked for what we think is needed to make the project financially viable and to do all of the things that we have proposed to do, including investment in the university building, not only on-site units, but $1.5 million contribution for inclusionary housing and certain other attributes that have real cost implications to the development.
Thank you.
What is the
So what I was trying to address that by saying that if you start to take floors off the building as an example, that would reduce the project's financial feasibility to the point where it's probably not viable.
Thank you.
So it's all or nothing.
Yes, sir.
This is not inclusionary house. I have another question for the traffic consultant. Do you have any estimates of the hourly rate that cars would be passing the protected bike lane for the drive-through? I just am wondering how many cars per hour would be crossing that protected bike lane that's pretty close to already a dangerous intersection for bikes that have to diagonally cross. So.
I do not have the hourly throughout the day, but we have it during the peak hours because that's what we normally look at. So currently, there is traffic coming off the alley that crosses the protected bike lane, both going in and out over 80 in the morning and about 120 in the evening. So that's already occurring, and as you heard earlier, the bank currently has a very wide curb cut, that serves the drive-through, one lane in and about 6 lanes out. So it's currently severely impacted by that. As far as how much traffic we're adding, we'll be adding about 40 trips in the morning and about 70 trips in the evening to that intersection of the alley.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I have a question for the gentleman who did the parking study. When you did your parking study, did you actually go and talk to owners of buildings in the surrounding area to find out how many cars? You made a statement about, I forget the number, but did you actually talk to, for instance, my building, which has 251 units and over 500 people, how many cars we have? Because we have more than your study.
No, I did not. I will add, though, that in 2015, 2016, the data that is the base of our modeled estimate is based on data collected from over 40 multifamily residential buildings in Evanston and across Cook County. So we applied that model estimate that we developed visiting all those buildings to create the estimate. I'll say that I think every building is different. The trends seem to be as a whole away from car ownership among key demographics. That's not true everywhere, but it was certainly true of the 40 buildings we visited.
Which we weren't one of. That's correct.
I will say we talked to the Park Evanston, which is the nearest large-scale residential project in proximity to the site. The parking utilization they have there is somewhere around 60% of the spaces they have on site. So we do know that there is an excess supply of parking immediately north of us.
Just one follow-up question. Do you have a apartment building?
No, we have a condo with 333 parking spaces, which are basically all used.
Oh, steady, folks.
No, I think that's a fair thing to bring up. The utilization of parking in rental buildings and in condominium buildings is different. The car ownership among those who own homes or condos tends to be higher than among those who rent, and that's true in downtown Evanston. It's true in most transit-served areas. And I think that that's a key distinction to make.
Chairman Ford. Chairman Ford.
Oh, hello.
Just going along with this line of questioning, it might be helpful if staff were able to determine from the city clerk how many wheel tax, how many people pay wheel tax in each of these surrounding buildings. That would seem to get a much better number as far as how many cars are being used within each of these buildings. Just
Thanks. Yeah.
For staff, again, though, there's been quite a few times, there's ample data on the usage of parking garages in the downtown area and the amount of available spaces for municipal lots at least. So could you recap that for us? I've heard it before, right? No?
Yes, we do have that information. We can look that up and probably provide some more this evening. It was in the transitory development study that precipitated the reduction in parking. We did look at data on vehicle registration and for certain buildings that were more recently developed. So we do have some of those numbers there. We'll probably be able to look that up this evening.
Mr. Smith.
I happen to have those numbers on offhand, if that's useful. We worked with Evanston staff to evaluate the available spaces at both the Church Street and Maple Street garage between 1 and 4 a.m. on weeknights, peak parking time. At that time, the Church Street lot has had an average of 160 spaces available, and the Church and Maple Street lots combined had 283 spaces available. So from that conversation, we at Antero, believed that there was capacity available at those lots at the times when parking demand would be at its peak.
I guess while you're up, I have a question. Parking will be included in rent or will be over and above?
It's generally an additional charge.
Okay. Sir, we're still on questions.
My question is to the council. My name is Chris Bodie, a 50-year resident and business owner in the city. How will the funds that this project generate as far as revenue be used or benefit our city?
That's a question you would have to address to the city council.
Okay.
It's a good question. One more, sir.
Sorry, this is a very thought-provoking discussion. I was just wondering, with your parking study, is that including now the accepted, approved Albion project that's going to increase traffic with restaurant and retail, and also with Target getting parking in the Sherman Plaza garage? Is that accounted in your parking study?
I think that's a great question. No, it is not. The study focused on the building and the model demand for cars at that building based on a combination of the national trends that I mentioned earlier and what we found at 40 different rental buildings across Cook County. I will say that with regard to those uses and in particular the Target. One of the things we did find is that at peak time, which is between 1 and 4 a.m. on a weeknight, that's the peak time when folks tend to be not working, in bed, parked. There would be ample there would be enough parking within the building to meet demand. And I think that's really relevant when considering a retail use like the Target. The peak times for parking for that Target are likely to be at the daytime, during the day, when parking will not be at its peak at this building. And so I wouldn't necessarily anticipate any conflicts from that building in particular, while acknowledging that surely that Target will create, more parking in general and more parked cars in general in downtown.
Thank you. Somebody down there has their light on. Oh, you got a question?
Can anyone tell me what the height is of the Park Evanston?
If you'll give us 1 second, Commissioner, we'll find out.
Okay, good.
Can you put up our...
I don't have it, unfortunately.
We don't.
I think it's...
Here. The Chase building, which is 270 feet.
Yeah, it's in the background there. See it?
Yeah. According to a third-party site, Emporis, that tracks building heights, they list it as 236 feet at Park Evanston.
Thank you.
Okay, a question, ma'am?
It's more of a rebuttal than a question.
Then let's wait.
Okay.
Are you signed in?
Yes.
You'll get your chance. Okay, then let's turn to testimony, and I had indicated that we will ask organizations to speak first with a 10-minute limit. Now, on the question of the inclusionary housing ordinance, it is not something that we can consider in our decision, but we are making a public record, which will go to City Council, and we will therefore entertain testimony. I know a number of you are here because you want to speak about the inclusionary housing issue, and we will allow that testimony, and it will go in the record and go to City Council with whatever recommendation we make with respect to all the standards to which we're bound. So, among organizations, I have a request to speak from the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. Ms. Moylan, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, I got him.
Thank you for allowing this testimony. My name is Prudence Moylan, and I serve as president of the St. Mary Conference of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul in Evanston. We're part of the Diocesan Council of the Society in the Archdiocese of Chicago. The Society of St. Vincent de Paul is a worldwide Christian community founded in Paris in 1833 and now serving in 149 countries. Though the Society is global, we are organized locally in conferences. Conference members, called Vincentians, live the mission of the Society by joining together in friendship to grow spiritually by offering person-to-person service to those who are needy and suffering. The Society is Catholic in its origin and remains an international Catholic voluntary organization of lay people. We elect our own officers and manage our own funds. We serve those in need, regardless of creed, ethnic or social background, health, gender, or political opinion. The St. Mary Conference in Evanston was established in 1871. There are 3 more conferences in Evanston, established later, associated with the parishes of St. Nicholas, St. Athanasius, and St. Joan of Arc. This network of conferences enables us to serve those in need throughout the community of Evanston. The Society of St. Vincent de Paul has legal recognition as a 501c3 charity. We have a long history of working with civil society, with religious groups and agencies established to help those in need. In fact, we frequently get calls from people who have been told to call us by the City of Evanston, Connections for the Homeless, and the Salvation Army. We primarily serve people who are not served by the city and other agencies. Annually, Vincentians in Evanston serve over 100 people with low incomes whose most urgent need is for help with rent and utilities. So we feel we help to prevent homelessness every day in the city. We support the approach to affordable housing included in the Vermilion development at 601 Davis because a fund of $1.5 million available immediately in 2018, should this be approved, opens new approaches and provides new funds to meet the housing needs of those who are not served well in our community. As administrators of this fund, we could serve more people in need of housing support. We could also provide, through our Vincentian network, case management and necessary support services to selected families identified through our school districts to help them achieve economic stability with housing they can afford. The proposed fund from the Vermilion development at 601 Davis could be a much-needed pilot project on housing equity in Evanston. It will make housing policy and practice more flexible by opening new opportunities, more inclusive by addressing the immediate needs of low-income residents, and more effective by developing models for supporting families to improve their economic position. This could become a model for new approaches to achieving housing equity in urban communities in Illinois and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moylan. The other organizational request we have is from Bird Friendly Evanston. Ms. Sloan or Ms. Pollack or both, how are you going to do this?
My name is Allison Sloan. I'm an Evanston resident, and I would like to take just about 5 minutes to talk about the issue of bird collisions in Evanston in regards to all buildings in Evanston, not just this one proposal. For thousands of years before the cities of Evanston and Chicago existed, millions of birds have been stopping to rest and refuel along the Lake Michigan shoreline in their migrations to and from their wintering grounds in South and Central America. Around 14 million birds stop in lakefront parks in the Chicago area every year. This includes about 280 different species. This refueling time in our urban forest is critically important to their survival. Some birds, like the blackpoll warbler, need to double their body weight on land before they fly 1,800 miles nonstop across the Atlantic, which takes them about 72 hours. Even though many of these birds are small enough to fit into an envelope, if you were to simply mail them to their destination, their navigational skills are so keen that they're able to return to the same tree in the opposite hemisphere. And perhaps even more amazing is that they accomplish this journey at night. When the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was signed into law in 1918, it became illegal to kill any bird that is native to the United States. Yet still, bird populations are in steady decline. While we're no longer shooting birds to extinction, as we did the passenger pigeon and the Carolina parakeet, we are inadvertently killing 500 million to 1 billion birds every single year with our glass windows. The good news is that technology now exists to prevent this problem, and new bird-friendly glass is being manufactured with patterns and coatings that are visible to birds. If we would like to continue living with birds in our world, this bird-safe glass will need to become our new normal and the window of choice by architects, contractors, retailers, and homeowners. This is 2,100 birds collected at Toronto buildings, and just the year 2016 by Flap Canada. Windows invite collisions when birds are simply not able to see them because they're transparent or because they reflect trees, the sky, and the surrounding environment. This reflectivity can be magnified by mirror-like coatings on some buildings. This is the Francis Searle building on the Northwestern campus. Volunteers have found hundreds of dead and injured birds there since this building was built in 1972. But even normal uncoated window glass at homes can reflect the surrounding habitat. This is a problem that can happen at any window. Birds can crash into windows that show plants and trees inside, or see-through corners and paired windows that show a clear path to the other side. And during their night migration, birds can be drawn to bright lights in their flight path, including lights from windows on tall buildings. Because songbirds use lights from stars and the moon to guide them, man-made lights can attract them, much like moths to a porch light. Turning off lights is especially important near the lakefront, where migration is concentrated. Since 1978, researchers from the Field Museum have collected over 30,000 birds at McCormick Place on the lakefront in Chicago. They determined that turning out the lights reduced nighttime window crashes by 83%. So in 2000, Chicago became the first city to launch a lights out program for tall buildings to turn off lights after 11 p.m. during migration season. This measure saves an estimated 10,000 birds every year.
Will you have comments specific to the development in front of us to make? I would suggest you get on with those then.
Okay, can I talk about Evanston specific?
Be quick.
Okay, I'll try. Evanston is also a lakefront city on the flyway. Millions of birds pass through our city each year, and sadly, thousands of them don't make it out. These are birds I collected at buildings on the Northwestern campus in just 2.5 weeks this spring. As you can see, these are not typical backyard birds. The majority died at this new mirrored building on the lakefront at Northwestern, the Kellogg Global Hub. We sounded the alarm about this building after I collected 82 dead and injured birds there in just a 2.5-week period this spring, and volunteers have found over 200 more birds there this fall. This is the view from the Kellogg patio, where birds clearly cannot distinguish the reflected lakefront and trees from reality. Birds also get trapped behind invisible glass railings at Kellogg, like this dead thrush and a rare blue-winged warbler. Fortunately, Northwestern has responded to our findings, and they say that they would like to become a nationwide leader in bird-friendly buildings. This fall, they installed window films over the entire Searle building that add a line pattern.
We really need to address the project in front of us.
Okay. And they're testing out films at Kellogg.
No, we really need to address the project in front of us.
My only questions would be in regard to the level, the residential levels, and what bird-friendly measures you might be considering for that.
So we had a conversation with the developers, and we were really happy. My name is Judy Pollack. I'm also with Bird Friendly Evanston, and we were really happy to be invited by Chairman Fort to address the group, and we just thought some general information would be useful to introduce our issue. But we're really grateful that city staff has been referring developers to us in advance of this whole process. And so we've been able to talk to a number of developers, which has been really great, and including the developers here. And our major recommendation is that there is a LEED
It's a LEED pilot credit called LEED 55. And we believe that by asking the developers to meet this LEED 55, which is the bird-friendly credit, that would address all of these problems with these buildings. And so we have had discussions with this developer about the LEED credit 55. They've applied it in some areas that the area from the sidewalk up to the podium is really excellent in terms of bird friendliness. They did a good job there. Our concerns with this building have to do with the glass railing, as was mentioned before, at the top of the podium, and then also the glass that is on the floors right above the podium. So like the next 2 or 3 floors from the podium level going up, because the problem for birds exists from about 60 feet and up, and then it resets at that podium level again because the birds can land on the podium. So again, there's a danger of them flying into transparent glass or reflective glass. So those are currently our concerns with this building, but we do think that they've done a great job on the at the street level. Yeah, and I mean, if anyone wants more information about LEED 55 or whatever, we've got a lot of it, and we'd be happy to share it.
Thanks. Sarah Vanderwicken, you're wishing to speak on behalf of Interfaith Action?
And joining forces for affordable housing.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I did hear the staff say that the inclusionary housing ordinance is not part of the standards or compliance with it is not part of the standards. However, the developer has included their affordable housing plan as part of their public benefits, which are put forward as a means for convincing you that the variances that they are seeking should be granted. And to that extent, it really is relevant to your decision making, it seems to me, if that's part of the overall rationale for going beyond the other requirements of the zoning ordinances. But I do appreciate that you're allowing us to speak on the inclusionary housing ordinance. While Vermilion has provided extensive documentation of the benefits that its proposal will provide in the form of rental assistance and homelessness prevention, these are a distraction from the main issue. The intent of the inclusionary housing ordinance is to create affordable units. Affordability solutions, such as those Vermilion proposes, are being addressed in other ways by the city as well as by other social service agencies, particularly St. Vincent has been discussed. And there are new subsidy programs being considered. The IHO is the only mechanism in place right now to create new affordable units, and that's what it should be used for. The city is in the process of evaluating options for addressing affordability, and we hope that they will be developing a comprehensive affordable housing plan. But Vermilion's proposal does not in any way comply with the inclusionary housing ordinance. The bottom line here is the number of affordable units which will result from this development. 4 units with a $1.5 million in lieu payment, which is explicitly for 5 years, is not even close to being enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, I think that, go ahead and clarify. Mr. Mangum's going to clarify something.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, the inclusionary housing ordinance is a separate ordinance of the city found in the city code, so it's not a public benefit to meet the inclusionary housing ordinance or to seek relief from it or provide an alternative equivalent plan. If you're exceeding and going up and beyond that, that would be a different matter. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, individual testimony now, and as I said, testimony will be limited to 2 minutes. I will take you in the order in which you've signed in. Hank Goldman.
Thank you, and I'll take a lot less to leave more for others. Again, as I mentioned before, my name's Hank Goldman. I live at 807 Davis Street, which is less than a block away from an area which I didn't know till the other day was a blighted area, nor did the 500 people who live in my building or the people who own restaurants and other retail establishments. But that's neither here nor there. Now to the proposal itself. The building's too big, too dense, will cause tremendous traffic and congestion issues in the area, wreak havoc on wind tunnel issues that already exist in the downtown, interfere with the bike lane that is used by many cyclists. The developers, like many other developers, have done a great job reading from the Developer 101 handbook on how great this building is going to be, what it's going to do for the city, and how wonderful everything's going to be. Kind of reminds me of another real estate developer. There are many in the city, including myself, that are not opposed to development. We realize the need for our city to continue to grow and prosper. All we ask is that any development is responsible and reasonable. This proposal is not even close to either one of those two. Thank you.
Thank you. Valley Lev.
Yeah, my topics were covered both by staff and by other speakers. Unfortunately, it looks like those comments don't count, but they were already covered.
Thank you, sir. Judith Treadway.
Good evening, Chair and committee members. I'm in support of this effort only for one reason. Evanston is making every effort to attract new families. At the same time, we've done little to retain our old families. The family I brought tonight is a fourth-generation Evanstonian family. They had to leave because the children were tired, have to go to school. She wanted to speak and talk about her challenges when she lost her permanent residence. This mother has struggled for years. She is living in transitional housing outside of Evanston for a temporary amount of time until she can find adequate housing in Evanston. Ms. Boylan said, we are here to serve the people who are not served well. We are decreasing our demographics in Evanston. It is sad because we don't want to use that little word called gentrification. We are increasing the homogeneous population of Evanston. Now, that's going to change that quaint image of Evanston of being so engaging and serving so many different people of so many race and ethnic backgrounds. I work with homeless families, and I think that this is another opportunity to try and put a little dent into the issue of how do we find adequate, fixed, appropriate housing for families who are struggling. Also, the program that they're proposing is a program that will have wraparound services that will move the family from low income towards middle income with enough support so that they can be considered an Evanstonian middle income. Let's move towards some kind of program to help many of our homeless families stay in Evanston, and let's not run them away to Chicago or the far northwest suburbs. Let's take an opportunity for one developer to truly invest in housing for families who have lost their permanent housing in Evanston. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Jack Weiss.
Mr. Chairman, Commission. My name is Jack Weiss. I'm president of Design Evanston. I'm an associate member of the Preservation Commission, and I'm a 50-year resident of Evanston.
I've watched year after year for more than 30 years as the vacant lot at 601 Davis in the very heart of downtown has sat unused, unkempt, and underutilized. The site has been an embarrassment to those of us who live here for far too long. If Albion Project is addressing a similar need on Sherman, surely Vermillion is addressing this problem at 601 Davis Street. Is this proposal the best solution for the site, or should we wait another 30 years? On September 25th, Design Evanston held a project review of the 601 Davis project. We made a number of recommendations, many of which were mentioned tonight, including lowering the height of the parking base, changing the facade openings on the base, adjusting the south facade to reflect the buildings across Davis Street, and changing the east facade with materials to better relate to the university building. Vermillion responded positively to all of our recommendations. They presented to the Preservation Commission on October 10th, and the Commission recommended approval of the project to you with conditions regarding the appearance of the parking base and impacts on and improvements to the university building, and Vermillion is addressing those concerns. I won't go into the DAPR review and recommendation. However, I do want to point out the problem about the drop-offs and the drive-through. Vermillion has revised the drive-through and drop-off areas. The current drive-through has 4 exits onto Davis. I'm told tonight perhaps there are 6. The proposed has only 1 through the alley. Drop-off areas are not unique to 601 Davis, as I think you probably know. They're becoming a major problem everywhere in downtown due to all of the new bike lanes. The 2009 downtown plan identified at least 10 buildings approved in the last decade with a height of 100 feet or more. And I quote, "On the whole, all of these buildings have enhanced the downtown skyline, and the residents of these buildings have brought vibrancy and economic vitality to downtown. This supports a finding that downtown is an appropriate location for larger buildings that are permitted under current zoning." The 2009 plan also suggested that, among other things, the scale and height of buildings in downtown should reflect the fact that downtown is the central place within the city of Evanston, that the scale and height of buildings downtown should reflect that the downtown is an appropriate location for high-rise, high-density, and mixed-use development, that the density, height, and scale of buildings downtown should reflect the city's desire for a compact and walkable environment, and lastly, that the scale and height of buildings permitted downtown should reflect the fact that downtown has many advantages as a place for tall and dense buildings, end quote. I believe that the building Vermillion Development has proposed and the design that Solomon Cordwell has created for 601 Davis meets and exceeds all of the suggestions in the 2009 downtown plan. For all these reasons, I recommend that you approve the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Ivan Hall.
Let me just say the 2009 plan is basically just a litigiously layered plan from one from 1963 that I had as a kid growing up here. And as far as vibrancy to the downtown, that comes from people, not buildings. It seems to me that there should definitely be a continuance because parking and wind tunnels, even the developers themselves says they have not fully vetted all of these issues. To perfectly create a wind tunnel is what we're doing right now in downtown Evanston. Buildings of various different heights spaced sporadically. Perfect. Job well done. As far as Evanston being a place of character, we're losing it quickly. We have this kind of backed around. I don't know why we're asking to have variances on codes. Developers should be actually complying with our codes. All right? So this whole situation is backwards. And I'm sorry, 6%'s not enough? Go somewhere else. Go to Oak Brook. All right? You know, building, this property can be made profitable. And if it's not this one, it'll be another one. Sorry, sir. It may not be 30 years. I don't know if you've been around downtown Evanston. It's on fire. Our existing infrastructure was not designed for this. We're already at a tipping point. And with the 4 or 5 buildings in the Pike, it's going to be very unlivable.
Gretchen Fothauer. Did I get close to pronouncing that right?
Good enough. Good
Thank
enough.
you.
I live on Hinman Avenue, within 1,000 feet of this project, so I got a postcard about the proposals. When I moved to Evanston, I wanted beautiful, civilized surroundings on sort of a human scale, and I'm afraid that getting more and more high-rises and more density and more traffic is going to undermine that. And the other point that I have is that having all these variances sets a very bad precedent. Any developer can just see them as optional, negotiable, and building height limits really don't exist anymore. If I wanted to be in a canyon of high-rises, I could have gotten more space for the money in Rogers Park. But I didn't want to move there because I didn't want to be there. And I hope this doesn't become like that. Finally, if the project was not going to be feasible, adhering to the zoning requirements, then why did they buy it in the first place? They must have bought it on the assumption that, of course, they would get tremendous number of variances, and this really is surprising how many they're asking for. So in general, I'm opposed to it.
Thank you. Carl Klein.
Good evening. Vermilion Development is proposing a mega development which obliterates the zoning code and provides no obvious public benefits. A lot of the public benefits that they list are actually just general requirements of a planned development. And also, you went over it, but I just want to go over it again because this is ridiculous. I mean, a 342% increase in number of dwelling units, a 368% increase in max height, a 142% increase from the site development increase, a 272% increase from the max FAR for a D3 zoning. And as Scott Mangum has said, without the university building, it would be 16 for the FAR when the requirement is 8. A 355% increase is for the floor area ratio without the university building, according to the max FAR for the D3 zoning. They're only providing 3 units, 3 loading berths instead of 5. The list goes on. I mean, why do we have a zoning code? Are you not going to follow it? I mean, there's a reason that we have a zoning code. And so, City Code Section 6366 states City Council may modify the established site development allowances for a zoning district by a 2/3 vote if such a modification is essential to achieve a public benefit. Well, the public benefits Vermilion Development is proposing are not significant enough to warrant City Council to allow 8 major variances, which will significantly alter the character of our community, and we cannot let developers dictate what the character of our community should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Singh. Okay, thank you. Chris Bodie.
As I said before, I'm a 50-year resident here and commercial realtor in Evanston. I have Bodie Studios across from the YMCA. I went to Evanston High School, graduated, lifeguard down at the beaches, special police 4 years, Evanston. Gave tours up in the lighthouse that you see over here in 1863. I really wasn't prepared, I mean, of the date what I'm looking at there. But I'm close to that, though. But I really wasn't prepared to say what I'm going to say now. But I hear everybody talking about zoning and this and that. But I remember as a Boy Scout looking up out at that lighthouse and looked at Evanston and it's changed. I remember being here in the 1970s when Old Orchard was built, and downtown, Wally Reed's, Sealig's, Huntley's, all these businesses, Baskin's, Litton's, they were all going out of business. You could take a bowling ball and roll it down the street. Ira Cohen was with the Chamber of Commerce at the time, and would come in, what are we going to do? We have no money here. What are we going to do? Things change. Zoning has to change to go along with it too. We're not sitting here heating our homes with logs and fires and standing outside and taking the cold. Things have to change or we can die. Anyway, I like the project. I like it for all of the reasons that they've talked about here, the positive reasons. I like the idea of the art that they're planning, giving back to the community, the idea of the money coming to help for the homeless. I think it's all positive, and I'd like to see this thing go through. Thank you.
Thank you. Sari Cattison Shapiro.
I have a question that for you folks. Is there a plan for what population we're aiming for Evanston? I think it's all the signs that say welcome to Evanston, and they say 78,000 or 79,000. As far as I remember, it's been like that since the 70s. Those signs have been the same. I can't believe that, the population has stayed exactly that. And I just wonder if there's some kind of aim, because we're with the Albion building and this building, that's 600 apartments added for downtown Evanston. And we have very few access streets because there's the lake on the east and there's one-way streets. So there's basically Church Street, and right now people are avoiding Church Street. They're going down Lake Street instead. Because I live on the corner of Lake and Elmwood, so I know that. And it starts at like 5:30 in the morning. I know we have noise ordinances, but those aren't really enforced. And I just, when they talk about parking and these transit communities and the trends, I know there's a trend for transit communities. Several have been built already, but I wonder, the statistic that I remember from Northwestern studying this was that 68 or 69% of Evanstonians drive to work. Only 19% take public transportation. So, and also there are the store owners that used to park in the Holiday Inn parking garage there. They're not allowed to park there anymore. So they, a couple of the hair salon people that we know have asked, where can we park around on the street? So it's already a big problem. So I know the trend is to build these big buildings that don't have, parking places for each apartment. But we already have a problem, is what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Staff, what is the population projection for Evanston? What does CMAP? What does CMAP have for us for the next what they're forecasting for transportation planning for 20 years, aren't they?
Good evening. We can provide that exact update from CMAP. We're gearing up right now for the next census, as is the federal government. So our focus has been on the next count, but we can get those numbers too for later in this meeting if you'd like them.
Thanks. Good. Claire Kelly.
So over the last 10 years, rents have increased in this town by over 30%, and while the average income has only increased by about 7%. And this is due to these luxury high-rise buildings. What you all are practicing is gentrification. This is gentrification on steroids, and we need to start calling it for what it is. People are being driven out of Evanston Certain populations are being forced to the west end and the south end and out of the east end of Evanston. And if we're going to talk about diversity, and if we really care about diversity, it's fraudulent, ignorant, or naive to talk about affordable housing without talking about the negative impact of gentrification and what's going on downtown Evanston. Thank you.
Thank you. Irv Chokol.
As I said before when I introduced myself with questions for the developers, my name is Irv Chokol. We've been residents for over 40 years in Evanston, and we are very disappointed in how Evanston continues to lose its character. Downtown Evanston continues to look more and more like downtown Chicago. Is that what we want in Evanston? The parking study was based on 40 buildings, according to the developers, throughout Cook County. How could there be 40 buildings in Cook County in communities like Evanston? That parking study has to be flawed for that reason. Can't we be satisfied with fewer benefits that don't require these extreme variances? I am convinced by following the Albion process after the Plan Commission that it was approved because of its benefits, and it narrowly won by a vote of 5-4 in the City Council. Fewer benefits without these variances would certainly be more appreciated. They said they've been working on this project for 3.5 years. I wonder why they would spend that much time and money on this project, knowing that they had to ask for extreme variances. Is that because we've developed a reputation as being pushovers?
Thank you. Kira Kelly.
Hi. So just a few short months ago, the Plan Commission here reviewed the Albion and unfortunately did not spend the kind of time, almost not 1 minute, discussing and deliberating the extreme variances that were asked for. You all spoke almost exclusively after the 2.5 hours of public comment in opposition. You spoke really about the affordable housing component. So it's very confusing. What was in that case, seemed to be a failure of our vetting and looking at that block as a transitional block. It really, that project undermined the intent and purpose of the D4 zoning there. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because not only did the former zoning board of appeals call it an obliteration of zoning, but an architect recently after the Albion approval said we have no zoning code. And also just think of when we have proposals coming in, another proposal for 37 stories in a 7-story zoned area. We do not need to do this. We need to respect our zoning. We need to respect our variances, especially as we are a hot market. We don't need to give away the farm here. Finally, also, there's been so much conversation about from residents about the parking and traffic issues, and it just doesn't jive with the paid developers' parking and traffic evaluations. So I really would recommend to the city to make conduct their own studies on that. Finally, I urge you to think about the impact of luxury housing on affordability. There's been so much research and articles about how this raises all overall rents. Articles such as a surplus of swanky residences mean wealthier residents aren't seeing the price increases that poorer ones are, and America's luxury boom, gentrification on steroids. So it's an important topic. It just seems like a disconnect when one of our main goals of the city is to keep Evanston affordable, yet we're bringing in more and more luxury housing that actually increases the prices. Thank you.
Thank you. This completes the list of people who've signed in wishing to testify. I will ask the developers then, the petitioners, do you want to make a closing statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, again for your time this evening. We appreciate the community input that we've heard, and over the 3.5 years, we genuinely have tried to work with city staff and other organizations within the community to try to be responsive to their and sensitive to their concerns. I think if you look at the diagram in front of you, what it shows is the project that we're proposing is not out of scale in any way with the uses or the buildings that surround it. In fact, it's very consistent in its size and its height, although slightly higher than as the Chase Building, Sherman Plaza, etc. At the same time, at the ground level, what we have done with our podium is actually create a street front that is lower in size than many of the surrounding uses. The Mather to the east, Sherman Plaza, and the Chase Building to the west, with our setback at 58 feet, is actually far lower than some of the other buildings on Davis. So we've tried to be sensitive to the pedestrian experience. As Jack mentioned earlier, this lot has, well, in one case sat vacant for about 30 years. In the case of the Chase lot, it's been in existence for about 40 years. And it will continue to be used as a drive-through. We think this markedly improves what exists today. Let me also address the issue of process. Some of the speakers this evening have criticized the variance process, but in fact, the downtown plan does encourage a planned development process for projects such as these. This is a normal part of processes, zoning processes all over the country, including one that has been used historically to a great degree here in Evanston and elsewhere. So while there is a zoning code, there is also a process that's prescribed to deviate from that zoning code. And again, that's widely recognized in land use across the country. So we hope that you will see the value in supporting this project for cleaning up these underutilized sites, these sites that have had incompatible land uses for so long, to finally create a very vibrant commercial front to this area, to put retail on the street, and to create a very pleasing building in the downtown that's consistent with the urban context, and one that will bring other benefits in terms of property taxes, sales taxes, et cetera, to the community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
Thank you. Staff, do you want to make closing comments?
I don't believe I have much more to say other than the recommendation that was already made for staff, recommendation for denial. A couple of additional points of information that were asked along the way: the population projection by CMAP at 2040, which was the projection was last completed in October 2014. For Evanston, is 79,529 residents in response to that. And then additionally, our TOD parking study did use data, 2015 data from the Illinois Secretary of State for the number of vehicles that are registered per development. There are about 10 to 12 existing developments that we have data in that report for.
All right. Having completed this process, we will close the public record and proceed to commission deliberation. I think what I want to do is ask first each commissioner if you have any general comments you want to make about the project, the request, and then we will pull up on the screen the special use standards for planned development and go through those one at a time and decide whether we believe they have been met or not. So, comments on the project. I think I started at that end the last time, so I'm going to start at this end. Commissioner Pigozzi, anything you want to say?
No, I think it was a very good presentation. I thought the documents were very clear, easy to read. I would much more so than others that have been presented to us, so appreciate that. I've been living here a long time, and I too have been looking at this vacant lot, wondering why, it stayed vacant for so long. I can speculate, but I don't want to. yeah, the drive-through is an eyesore. It has been for a very long time. I think it's a positive thing to develop this site. I think you guys did a very good job with the podium. No argument there. I think it's the right kind of development for this site. It's unfortunate that the drive-through is going to stay there, but I understand the reality of the situation. I am concerned about the height. It's hard not to be. That's the one thing that's bothering me about it. Without really knowing or understanding the financing, it's really hard to judge. Those were my only comments. I would, on one note, on a personal level, to build such a high structure or proposal, the expression of the shifting grid with varying paint colors, I assume, may not be the most appropriate solution if one is going to impose a view of this building pretty much throughout. You're going to be able to see this building throughout Evanston. So I don't, it's some people might love it. I'm puzzled by it. Those are my comments.
Thanks. Commissioner Dubin?
I'm still very concerned about the impacts on traffic because with the new Fountain Square, it's designed so there will be times when Davis is closed from Orrington to Sherman, which essentially means there'll be no traffic from Sherman to Benson. So anybody on Davis will have to turn north onto Orrington, and that can certainly create problems. I'm concerned about traffic backups. Davis is now 2 lanes. 2-hour meters, you have people trying to park, that holds up traffic. You're supposed to move your car every 2 hours, and I think this will be bad for the retail on Davis, and I don't think people like to park in parking garages. I'm not talking about your tenants, I'm talking about people coming to use the downtown. The people will be less inclined to come downtown when their only option for parking is a parking garage 2 blocks away. I'm concerned about the impact on retail.
Commissioner Lewis.
Okay, well, a general statement that I agree with Mr. Bodie on his comments about that you have to change, and I think the downtown plan points out that we need density in order to have a thriving downtown, both commercially and having dense housing downtown seems very appropriate. I also think that the absolute height of the building is magnified by the effort to keep the university building. And one of my first thoughts when I was looking at the data earlier was I calculated you could make the building 60 feet shorter by making it another 40 feet longer, get a couple more units per floor. And so I don't think they should be penalized for the absolute height for making this effort to make a smaller footprint and maintain some of the character of the downtown with the older historic building. Also, they have made a very good attempt at the low-scale street front. That said, the absolute allowances and the amount of kind of overstepping the density seems extreme to me, and more than I would be, comfortable with. So,
Commissioner Goddard.
Yes, I agree with Commissioner Lewis. I think the scale of the building is inappropriate for this site. I think they're asking for too many variances, and we're not getting enough public benefits. I know we're not supposed to talk about the inclusionary housing, but I'm a little confused as to why you didn't go ahead with what the city has said it wants and designed your own proposal. Anyway, I think it's too dense, it's too high, there's too many variances. It's not a good fit.
Commissioner Saul.
A lot of my thoughts have been said already, so I'll keep this brief. But I am not opposed to density. I'm not opposed to height, but I do think that the scale of variances here are excessive and are not compensated by the public benefits presented by the developer.
My general comments echo a lot of what's already been said. The site and the development as a whole, I like it. I also believe that the downtown ultimately needs more density, but the overall height and the number, basically the requests with respect to height, number of units, and FAR, I believe, are significantly in excess of what is appropriate for the area.
I want to just speak briefly about the proposal in the context of the downtown plan. I'm looking at the model. If this building was 6 inches to the west or the northwest, I would love it. But in the context of the downtown plan, it is in what I believe is called the East Traditional Zone. The East Traditional Zone maximum height under the plan is 5 stories. Immediately to the east is and that's the blue sort of S-shaped down in the lower right-hand corner. Immediately to its east is the east, I believe it's called the east border or east edge, the green, long, tall green, in which I believe the maximum height is 8 stories. What's important here, and then the orange, the downtown core, in which the maximum height is, I forget what, 200 and some odd feet. The issue here is not the absolute heights, but the heights relative from one zone to the next. This property sits right on an edge, and the intent of the downtown plan clearly was to transition down from a tall central core to a lower rest of Evanston. Placed where it is, this building is quite the opposite of a transition. It puts the tallest building in Evanston right on an edge. And I don't believe that the podium solution, I understand what you're trying to do, to give us a podium that looks right at street level with the height on top of it, but I don't think it satisfies that transitional intent of the downtown plan. In the middle of the downtown core, I would have no problem with this height at all. Having said that, can we pull up the special use standards? Are there further comments anybody wants to make before we go to address the standards? All right. We need to make a determination on each of these. And the staff, sometimes the staff gives us a check-marked version, but for each of these, I'm going to ask the staff where it would check mark, and then, you think you have one? Oh, okay. And then we can talk through our own response. So, number one, the development is one of the special uses specifically listed in the zoning ordinance, a permissible special use in the D3 zoning district. Yes, staff?
Yes, both a planned development and a drive-through are both special uses within the D3 district.
Okay, so that one is satisfied. It is in keeping with the purposes and policies of the adopted comprehensive general plan and the zoning ordinance as amended from time to time. Staff?
It satisfies many of the general intents of having density in the downtown area and the downtown core and transit-oriented areas. So I'd say in general that's satisfied.
And the zoning ordinance as amended from time to time.
Certainly allowances are being requested from the zoning ordinance. Some commissioners and staff has commented that believe that those allowances that are requested are in excess of what should be approved in this location for this development.
And I want to read a provision, and this is from, Megan noted it earlier, Section 6-11-1-10, which are the standards which apply particularly to plan developments in the D districts. Each plan development shall be compatible with and implement the adopted comprehensive general plan as amended, the plan for downtown Evanston, any adopted land use or urban design plan specific to the area, the zoning ordinance, and any other pertinent city planning and development policies. As I've already said, I think in terms of the standard of the downtown plan, this doesn't do it. As far as the zoning ordinance, we're all used to excursions. We've approved lots of excursions beyond the zoning ordinance. The percentage excursions here strike me as pretty high. If I have done the math correctly, the request is 1.42 times the maximum with site development allowances, 313 feet as opposed to 220. The floor area ratio is 1.53. I'll come back to parking. So I think from my perspective, this one goes far enough beyond the zoning ordinance that compatibility becomes a real issue. Commissioner Lewis.
But the absolute height, I think, is not the extreme that is being proposed, because they had the right to build a lower building by eliminating the university building and chose to maintain that. So I'm more concerned with the number of dwelling units and the FAR, but not the absolute height, because that's a value judgment that was taken toward height versus maintaining ground level character. So.
Okay, I'd be happier with that if there was a formal provision for transfer of development rights, but I understand what you're saying. What about the number of dwelling units then under the zoning ordinance? A request for 318. The max permitted in the D3 is 93. There is no max in terms of site development allowances. I guess my question then to us is, do we concur with the staff's finding that this does meet the requirements of the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance? I'm looking for nods or shakes of head. I take it we concur with staff. It will not cause a negative cumulative effect. This is number 3, when its effect is considered in conjunction with the cumulative effect of various special uses of all types on the immediate neighborhood and the effect of the proposed type of special use upon the city as a whole.
Certainly sets a dangerous precedent as far as the number and amount.
Use your mic.
It certainly sets a dangerous precedent in the amount of allowances we're giving them, we would be giving them.
Well, but I think the question here is whether in conjunction with other special uses. Now, Commissioner Isaac has raised the question of whether there's a special use related to the bank, but otherwise, I mean, is there anything around it on the basis of which you would calculate the cumulative effect?
I mean, considering that the drive-through is already existing, I don't know that we can say that maintaining it at maintaining the drive-through at a smaller level, having less drive-through lanes would have a greater impact than keeping the status quo. So from a special use perspective, as it relates to the drive-through, I would say that their proposal meets the standards.
Doesn't add anything.
And in fact, it reduces.
Okay.
I would disagree with that. I think it's going to dramatically increase the traffic in the alley. It might reduce the amount of car lanes that are going through the drive-through, but the traffic in that area will, for better or for worse, I'm not putting a value judgment on, but it's going to increase.
I absolutely agree with you that the traffic will increase, but the traffic related to the special use, which is the drive-through, would presumably decrease by having, or not be affected at all by having fewer lanes. What we weren't really told during the presentation was how many cars actually go through that drive-through a day. And if they have, 4 lanes or 6 lanes or whatever they have there active at all times, I mean, these are obviously numbers that could have been provided by Chase, but we didn't see anything. We don't know whether reducing it from 6 or 4 to 2 is going to increase the traffic at any one given time. We do know there's going to be less lanes, and so there's absolutely going to be less capacity. That could ultimately mean
More stacking.
It could be more stacking, or it could mean that people choose not to use that ATM, and it's just the market sort of corrects itself. We don't really know.
I wonder if, well, let's hold on to that question of the cumulative impact of special uses and go down to number 6. It does not cause undue traffic congestion. It sounds to me as though maybe, Commissioner Isaac, what you're saying is it meets the cumulative impact of special uses problem, but it may still raise a traffic problem.
It absolutely could. I don't know that we have information to say one way or the other.
The traffic consultant said it won't.
But I don't think the traffic consultant was addressing the traffic and the waiting periods for the drive-through. I mean, it just talked about absolute numbers that was handled by whatever number, 6 lanes instead of 2. So the possibility is there that if there's the same capacity going through a smaller amount, that there's going to be stacking that could stack across the bike lane or whatever kind of thing that happens. But
Commissioners, just to clarify, both the drive-through requires a special use as well as the plan development. So these standards, special use standards, refer to the plan development itself as well as the drive-through.
As the drive-through. Okay.
Do we need to address each of these separately for each special use? Or are we looking at it cumulatively?
It looks to me as though if the drive-through requires its own special use, the only two criteria that apply are the one concerning traffic congestion and the one concerning negative cumulative effect, that the others aren't relevant to the drive-through, whereas they are relevant to the whole development. Yes? No?
I would just suggest that we look at it comprehensively, since it is the plan development and the drive-through is a component of the plan development. So I would look at it as one thing and not attempt to break them out.
Yeah, I think I would agree.
This is Assistant City Attorney. Yeah, they are looked at in the cumulative, in a comprehensive manner.
We can. Okay, good. Now, having gone down to the question of traffic, I think we also need to include there the question of parking. What's your sense of the parking situation? Is the proposal adequate or not?
Well, I would say that it's, I don't know if frustrating is the right word, but we just recently reduced the amount of parking required by developments, and this one comes in, below that, and so that if this is if this is foreboding what's to come, I think we're going to see, no matter what the parking is, we're going to see people coming in and asking for less. That being said, I've read recent articles that, our idea of driving and parking and owning cars is going to change significantly over the next 20 years. And this building is going to be around much longer than that. And so from a parking perspective, I don't believe that this will have a negative effect, but it is troubling that we set numbers and those, we're still getting requests for variations to those amounts. Sort of a mixed bag.
Yeah, I share Commissioner Isaac's concern on that. I don't know, Megan, did you find what would this building have required in terms of parking prior to the adoption of the TOD ordinance?
Prior to the recently approved ordinance, they would have needed 452 parking spaces. And that's for both the residential component and the commercial component.
Thank you. So we went through a process looking at much the same data as your parking consultant has looked at, on a project that was done for us by consultants hired by CMAP, and ended up recommending a change in the ordinance with respect to transit-oriented development areas. And the effect on this building would be to reduce the parking requirement from 452 to 267 at 0.55 per unit. I share Commissioner Isaac's frustration. I'm not surprised at this. I knew as soon as we adopted that standard, requests were going to come in to undercut it. This is a request to undercut it by 50%. The ordinance, it seems to me, is not old enough yet that we should begin to treat it lightly. I would suggest that in terms of the parking requirement, this does not meet the standards.
Right.
I had one additional question relating to parking. The 75, I believe it was 7,500 square feet of retail that was used to determine the parking requirements. Are we including the existing university building to the east, since it's part of the development and there's being changes effectively to the site? Are we including the retail or the uses there in determining the amount of parking that would otherwise be needed for the site as a whole?
I believe in the zoning analysis because it is an existing building, it's an existing legal non-conforming building and does not have parking currently, that no additional parking is required for that. Okay. So the parking requirements essentially just have to do with the new construction.
Understood.
So you can gain the benefit of it for FAR and everything, but you don't have the detriment for the parking.
Okay, let's go back up. Number 4, it does not interfere with or diminish the value of property in the neighborhood. Is there any disagreement that it meets, that will meet that standard?
I believe it meets the standard, yes.
Meets the standard. It can be adequately served by public facilities and services. Staff, your assessment is sewer, water?
Yes, it can comply with codes as they come in if it's approved in the development process.
Okay. Preserve significant historical and architectural resources, such as they are, clearly.
Yes.
Preserve significant natural and environmental features not applicable. Complies with all other applicable regulations of the district in which it is located and other applicable ordinances except to the extent that such regulations have been modified through the plan development process or the grant of a variation.
I don't know how you wouldn't ever meet that standard, but yes.
There you go. Okay. All right, so we have it seems as though we have sort of a mixed response on the subject of traffic and parking. A partial? We're not sure? What's your pleasure, folks?
We're not sure, then
Default to not satisfied? On parking and traffic?
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for head shakes, head nods. Okay. Does not meet.
Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Just to remain consistent, I would reference that no study or information was provided regarding the effect that this many units would have on local school populations.
Okay. I want to go back to number 2. I want to be sure we're in agreement on this one. In keeping with the purposes and policy of the adopted comprehensive general plan and the zoning ordinance as amended from time to time.
Excuse me, Chair Ford, can we just clarify the item that you wanted not satisfied? That was item 3?
That was item, I think we satisfied item 3, but we did not satisfy item 6.
Okay. So you said not satisfied for item 6?
Correct.
Okay. And you wanted to mark satisfied for item 3 or not satisfied?
I think that's satisfied, yes.
Thank
you. Okay, now, number 2, which is the critical one, because this is the one where we get into height and bulk and FAR and the whole rest of it. Keeping with purposes and policies of the zoning ordinance. I want a show of hands on this one. Those who believe that that standard is met.
Yeah,
It is in keeping with the purposes and policies of the adopted comprehensive general plan and the zoning ordinance as amended from time to time. All right. Hands, that standard is met. Hands, that standard is not met. Okay, that answers that. Thank you. Do we then need to address the standards for planned developments? The next slide. And the specific slide for standards in the D zones? Oh, boy. It's impossible to read.
Can you give us a copy of this next time?
That slide simply introduces the next set of detailed standards, does it not? So let's go to the next slide, and we're just going to have to read them. And somebody else is going to have to read them. Oh, here we go. Oh, look at that. Okay, each planned development shall be compatible with surrounding development and not be of such nature in height, bulk, or scale as to exercise any influence contrary to the purposes and intent of the zoning ordinances set forth in section 6-1-2. And then it goes on to talk about landmarks. Planned development shall be compatible with the Secretary of the Interior's standards of rehabilitation. I'm going to assume that that standard was met, was addressed and satisfied by the recommendation from the Historic Preservation Commission. But the question is about compatible with surrounding development and not be of such nature in height, bulk, or scale as to exercise any influence contrary to the purpose of intent of the zoning ordinance. Yes or no?
No. Scale.
Okay, no. Each planned development shall enhance the identity and character of the downtown by preserving, where possible, character-giving buildings, enhancing existing streetscape, amenities, maintaining retail continuity in areas where it is prominent, strengthening pedestrian orientation and scale, and contributing to the mixed-use vitality of the area. That's pretty complicated.
I would say satisfied.
Satisfied? Each planned development shall be compatible, oh, my eyes are getting old, with an implement. Whoops, we lost the left margin, folks. There you go. Compatible with and implement the adopted comprehensive general plan as amended, the plan for downtown Evanston, any adopted land use or urban design plan specific to the area, this zoning ordinance, and any other pertinent, don't flick it on me, pertinent city planning and development policies, particularly in terms of land use intensity, housing preservation, environmental, urban design, traffic and parking, impact on schools, essential character of the downtown district, surrounding residential neighborhoods and abutting residential lots, neighborhood planning, conservation of the taxable value of land and buildings through the city, and retention of taxable land on tax rolls. Yes or no?
It's unfortunate that it's so many things in one.
Yeah. It looks to me as though if you assume that they are in order of importance, it starts out no and then it starts to turn yes down toward the bottom. All right, yes or no?
No.
No's? No. Traffic impact and parking. Oh, wait a minute. Let's go up. Number 4. Plan development should be completed within 2 years. That's one of the conditions that's set by staff if we approve this. Landscaping treatment within the plan development should be provided in accordance with the requirements set forth in Chapter 17. We don't know.
Well, I don't think they asked for any. They didn't ask for any adjustments to that.
Okay, so satisfied?
I'm willing to go there.
Okay. Number 6. Is there a 6? Okay. Oh, now we get into the All right, walkways developed for a planned development shall form a logical, safe, and convenient system for pedestrian access to all project facilities and off-site destinations likely to attract substantial pedestrian traffic. Pedestrian ways shall not be used by other automotive traffic. Yes, no? Yes. The location, construction, and operation of parking, loading areas, and service areas shall be designed to avoid adverse effects on residential uses within or adjoining the development, and where possible, provide additional parking beyond that required for the planned development to service the downtown district in which it is located. Yes or no? I hear one no. I see another no. I'm looking for head. Okay.
The only issue is the language after the word "and." It says "where possible." Well, I mean, I am, but I mean, I would lean towards yes on this.
I would say yes because it
Yeah, okay, we're leaning toward yes. Principal vehicular access points should be designed to permit smooth traffic flow with controlled turning movements and minimum hazards to vehicular or pedestrian traffic. Local streets within the development, that's not relevant. So, principal vehicular access points should be designed to permit smooth traffic flow with controlled turning movements. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes? Yes. The planned development shall provide, if possible, for underground installation of utilities. Yes?
Yes.
For every planned development, there should be provided a market feasibility statement.
Yes.
We have that. Yes. Zoning administrator may, at his or her discretion, require the applicable additional studies or impact analysis. That's not our problem. Is there a number 8?
6 was traffic study.
Oh, okay, yes, 6. Every planned development that should be provided a traffic circulation impact study. That we have. Okay. Does that conclude it? All right, so we have a mixed response on compatibility with the standards.
In addition, Mr. Chairman, we don't have a slide for it, but the next set of standards, or C, just deals with the maximum development allowances. We've covered those earlier in the presentation and the staff report. That's where the maximum development allowance for height that's provided is 220 feet, and the maximum FAR allowance that's provided is 8.0.
Okay, so this is simply to confirm that the maximums have been exceeded by the proposal in terms of height FAR. Okay. All right. That report on the standards will go to council with whatever recommendation we make. Is there any further discussion among the commissioners on this, or are you ready for a motion? All right, does somebody want to offer a motion? Let's do this positively, bearing in mind that you don't have to vote for your own motion if you don't want to. Would someone like to move that we send this proposal to City Council with a positive recommendation?
I motion to approve the proposal with the inclusion of the staff recommendations as they were presented, and with the additional recommendation that if ever the Chase drive-through property become available, that it would no longer be allowable to be used as a drive-through.
Okay. Okay. Is there a second?
I second.
Commissioner Isaac. Discussion on the motion. All right, let's call the roll.
Commissioner Goddard,
No.
Commissioner Saul,
No.
Commissioner Isaac,
No.
Commissioner Pagozzi,
No.
Commissioner Dubin,
No.
Commissioner Lewis,
No.
and Chairman Ford.
No. 7 noes, no ayes. The motion is defeated. Now, would you like to then, would someone like to move that we send, if we make no decision, then it goes to council with no recommendation? Would someone like to move that we recommend denial to city council?
So move.
Commissioner Goddard, is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Saul, is there permission to reverse the previous roll call? In which case the vote will be 7 ayes and no nays.
Right. Let's just run through it.
Yeah.
Let's just run through it.
You want to call it? You want to call the roll rather than reverse?
Please call the roll. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, is everyone clear on the motion?
Ready.
Yes.
The
All
motion,
right.
the motion is to send with a recommendation of denial.
All right, Commissioner Goddard,
Aye.
Commissioner Saul,
Aye.
Commissioner Isaac,
Aye.
Commissioner Pagozzi,
Aye.
Commissioner Dubin,
Aye.
Vice Chair Lewis,
Aye.
and Chairman Ford.
Aye. 7 ayes, no nays. The motion is adopted. The petition will be sent forward to City Council with a recommendation for denial. Thank you all for your patience this evening. This has been, you all have been good about this, and we appreciate it. There is no further business, I think, to come before us. I will ask if any member of the public has any further comments she wants to make on anything other than this. The public is shaking her head no. Thank you, Jessica. We have a meeting scheduled for next Wednesday, December 6th. The principal item on that agenda will be the Zoning Committee's recommendation on the C1A district. The other business will be the election of a chair and vice chair for 2018 and the approval of a meeting schedule for 2018. Staff, anything else we need to say?
I believe so.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn? Dubin, seconded. Isaac, it's his turn. All in favor? Opposed? None. We're adjourned.